Okay. All right. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Hartford Selectboard on Tuesday, October 29th, 2024 at 6 p.m. Our first item of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Would anyone like to lead us?
Sure.
Okay.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much, Ryder.
All right, before we get into our next business, a couple announcements. First, Sue Buchholz has resigned her position from the Select Board. I'd like to thank Sue for her service to the board, and the board will be deciding what to do with that position, if anything, before the election in March, so stay tuned. The other announcement, if everyone who's in the audience could sign in at the front table, that would be great. So we're going to end our time as the Select Board and open up as the local liquor control board. We have a renewal application for Putnam's Vineyard for licenses first class, second class, and outside consumption. So this is a renewal, and we don't require anyone from Putnam's to be here. So if anyone has any comments or wants to make a motion, please do so. All right.
Sure. I move that the Select Board renew the Putnam's Vineyard LLC, doing business as Putnam's Vineyard, 188 South Main Street, White River Junction, Vermont, 05001, first class, second class, and outside consumption permits.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second from Brandon. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right, we'll end this portion of the Liquor Control Board meeting and reopen as the Select Board. We have no Cannabis Control Board business tonight. Order of agenda looks straight forward. If we go through the public comment and everything and get to the public hearing before 6:30, we might try and knock off a quick agenda item, but we shouldn't start the hearing before 6:30 in case people are here to comment on that. All right, public comments. We'll start with people in the room, and then we'll hear from those who are joining us by Zoom. If you'd like to comment, please come up to the microphone, state your name and town or village of residence. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. We do have a timer that'll be up there. If the timer goes off, please just wrap up your remarks. Please address the Select Board as a whole and try to refrain from personal attacks. So we'll start with people in the room. Any public comment? Come on up.
Like a debate rapid session thing, but I'm delighted to be here. My name is Tim Ferriel. I'm from White River Junction, and I was trying to sort of differentiate tonight because I know you guys are touching on the Fairfield Terrace specific project tonight, and I would like to speak to that, but I'm guessing I should wait until that comes onto the agenda. Is that appropriate?
Yeah, that would be,
okay.
We'd like that. Thank you.
So the other matter that I wanted to bring up tonight, as you guys head into the budget season, is the concept of where we'll say Hartford lies amongst its peers. I did a fair amount of research today related to our grand list, our municipal budget, our tax rate, our common level appraisal, which we know is a thorn in everyone's side, and the school tax rates. And for me, as a taxpayer and engaged citizen, I'm troubled by all of them. I think one of the challenges that we have here is that to the extent the school and the town somewhat operate independently or separately, I think is very problematic for us as taxpayers. We have one of the lowest current CLAs in the state, certainly among our peers. I did research here, which I'm happy to share you with my spreadsheet of 20 arguably peer towns related to sort of the scale of the town, their municipal budget, their tax rates, and their CLA. And we're not doing very well. I'm very dismayed in the sense that I understand the CLA thing is a statewide issue, but specific among our peer groups, it kind of is not. And I really feel like we need to be very aggressive on getting our CLA in the right place. Now, why does that matter? Well, it matters because we are one of the largest grand list towns in the state of Vermont. And if you look at the budget formulas and how the school budgets actually work, we are giving away a ton of money to the state of Vermont. Because you basically have what we'll call a penalty factor around the CLA. And you can say, well, that doesn't matter on the town side. Well, sure it does, because it's a collective budget that you and the school try and pass every year amongst, bond issues and so on. And it's very troubling to me that we are just not really aggressively trying to get our CLA in a place that would serve all of us very well, because we have a very, very large grand list. And we are suffering dramatically on the school budgeting formula side, and to the tune of millions of dollars because of this issue. So I'm begging and pleading with you to try and work with the school, get the CLA where it needs to be, and try and get our overall budgeting and formula system kind of in line with some of our peers. And I'm happy to go over this with you guys later, but I'll come back when we bring up the Fairview Terrace issue. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Tim. Public comment?
Tim,
Manning? Manning?
Tim, wait a minute. Tim, can you forward that stuff, please, to us?
Yes,
If you have an electronic form? Thank you.
Okay, public comment in the room?
What is a CLA?
It's called the common level appraisal. It has to do with the deviation between your market value of your properties and what's on the grand list.
Any more public comment in the room? Okay, seeing none, do we have anyone on Zoom?
One hand up at the moment.
Okay, let's hear from them.
Go ahead, Marie.
Hi, good evening, Marie Elvin, White River. Just a report on Hartford Avenue. Everything up here looks great right now, and a shout out to the HPT patrol team. Definitely have seen an increase, and we're always happy to see that. Also, I know you guys are doing budget, so I don't want to go on, but about the lights in the park and ride. I plan on putting together a packet, and we'll be presenting something in the near future, but I just wanted to bring it up that I hope that you will all keep that in mind about getting lights at the park and ride in the future as you are planning the 2026 budget. And thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Marie. Any other comments on Zoom?
No other hands up at the moment.
Okay, we'll end public comment and we'll go to select board comments and announcements. So Kim, you want to start us off if you have anything?
Just that hopefully we'll have a strong turnout at the polls on Tuesday, in addition to the couple thousand of absentee ballots that have already been received by the clerk's office. And yeah, kudos to Lisa and the town clerk team for really covering all the bases for the general election on Tuesday.
Thank you, Kim. Brandon, anything?
Nothing for me.
Mary, anything?
No, just ditto with what Kim said.
Okay, I didn't.
I have like a very lighthearted event that I just want to put out there that has to do with the tree board, which I'm a liaison to. I'm just going to say it now because I might forget at the very end. But they're doing, as many folks know, First Friday in White River Junction. There's a lot of events and activity in the evening. And so this coming Friday is the first Friday. And the tree board is partnering with the Upper Valley Co-op to do a tree identification walk. I think they're coming to Lyman Park and they're meeting outside the co-op. So just want to let folks know that that's going on Friday evening.
Okay, thanks you. Lanny, anything?
Yeah, I do have something to say. It's very disheartening to see any member of the select board resign midway in term. This is an extremely difficult job. The decisions that we make affect a grand scale of people, but they're never right. You have half the people in the town that support the decision, half the people that don't. And if you're a vocal opponent that doesn't support a decision, that doesn't give you the right to chastise someone and say that they're inappropriate or doing the wrong thing for within their position. And words mean a lot more than people give them credit for. And for the people in our town that think this is easy, step up to the plate and do the job, because this is not easy. It's very disgusting when I see a member of the select board resign, and I know the reasons why. People out there have to realize it's not easy being up here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lanny. I have no select board comments, so we'll move on. Appointments, we don't have any. Town managers report. So John, we'll turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will keep it relatively brief, and I have asked the planning director to come down and talk about FEMA if we're gonna have this gap.
Sure.
Before the public hearing starts. The communications and media specialist reports that he has created another edition of the Hartford News. Hopefully that's being well received in the community. He has also populated the website calendar with upcoming meetings and events, updated the website to reflect current news and updates in the town, and is updating social media. I will point out that the town's new electronic sign outside the building is now in operation, spreading important messages to the community on an alternating basis every few seconds. So keep an eye out for the latest news from the town's automated sign. The Environmental Sustainability Coordinator points out that on Wednesday, October 23rd, there was a tour of the Public Safety Building for HVAC contractors interested in submitting bids for installing heat pumps in that facility. Bids are due November 6th. There were 2 contractors who took that tour. The Highway Division reports that they're starting to prepare trucks for the winter plow season, and that staff is completing training on road winter maintenance. As to the Department of Parks and Recreation, Scott Hauser reports that the Ventrac with attachment arrived and the staff have been putting it to work. The machine was purchased with ARPA funding. Staff used the machine and blower attachment recently at Town Hall, and it worked extremely well and saved a considerable amount of time, allowing for other projects to be completed. Recreation Specialist Tatum Barnes recently took and passed the National Recreation and Park Association's professional certification. Tatum is now a certified Parks and Rec professional. In addition to passing the exam, Tatum was recently awarded the Vermont Recreation and Park Association Young Professional Award. The award was presented at the state conference in Killington. Congratulations, Tatum. I do point out also that over $1,400 worth of archery equipment was recently stolen out of a storage trailer at Clifford Park. With regard to the update from the Planning and Development Department, there is a report that there's continued work ongoing with the developer of 2 parcels off Sykes Mountain Avenue to address Planning Commission and Zoning Board of Adjustment conditions of approval in order to issue a zoning permit for the development of 250 multifamily dwelling units. They also point out that they're working to redesign the department's website to make it more user-friendly. Hartford Police point out a couple of recent achievements. First, a patrol shift located a vehicle reported stolen from Springfield, Vermont. While attempting to flee, the subject rammed the canine cruiser and then took off and drove off an embankment. After a canine track, the operator was located and taken into custody. The incident is still under investigation. There's also a report that on October 18th, the Hartford Police Department Criminal Investigations Division arrested a 42-year-old man for lewd and lascivious conduct with a child and criminal threatening after an investigation launched in September. During the execution of search warrants, members located potential evidence related to the lewd and lascivious with a child and criminal threatening charges, as well as a criminal quantity of marijuana, suspected methamphetamine, cocaine, and 12 firearms. The Outreach Division, in collaboration with the Claire Martin Center, interviewed an applicant for the embedded substance use provider position at the police department. And Amy Wunderlich has started at the police station in the Outreach Division as the department's crime data analyst. Her first day was today, or yesterday, I should say. Town clerk reminds voters that The clerk's office will close noon on Monday, November 4th, to set up and prepare for the election to be held the next day, Tuesday, November 5th. The fire department notes that all shifts participated in combined drills recently with Hanover and Lebanon fire departments. They also point out that the Act 250 and state wastewater permits have been received and approved for the station number 2 project in Quechee. Contractors will be submitting construction permits and work is scheduled to begin next month. Thank you.
Questions for John? Nate?
Hey, John, a couple of things. You mentioned the cruiser in the accident. Is the cruiser still usable? Is it totaled? What's the status of the cruiser?
I don't know, but we may have Chief Sheldon on the line. You see him there, Ken?
Yes.
I just want to know if we have to replace that now and what our canine officer is using for a vehicle. Chief, can you address that if you're online?
Yeah, Lanny, thank you. No, the cruiser is still operational. It's more cosmetic damage. It doesn't necessarily look the best, but it is usable. Do have estimates to repair it, and we're in the process of filing a claim with Vermont Leagues of Cities and Towns.
Okay, excellent. That's good. With the addition of this new canine officer, do we have enough canine equipped vehicles, or are we going to have to look at another vehicle?
Right now, we're doing okay. In the future, Eric Clifford and his dog may be retiring early next year, so we're waiting to hear about that and what's going to take place. So if that happens and Dozer retires, then we won't need another one at this point. You know, in the future, if we decide to put on another canine, we'll talk about it. But right now, it's kind of in a holding pattern, and yeah, we're kind of struggling for a vehicle for some of the detectives, but I think we're going to be able to work some stuff out.
Okay, thank you, Chief. And then one other thing, John, and since we have the DPW director in here, Hartford Bridge, it's great to see Hartford Bridge up and usable. A concern that I have about it is that there are catch basins for water runoff, but with the concrete sides, it's going to be a little bit of a difficulty when it comes to plowing snow. But you guys have a plan in store for snow removal on that bridge come winter time if we have a real winter again?
Well, Lenny, we'll have to take a look at that. I mean, I think I have a meeting scheduled with Jay Strong, who's the V-Trans regional engineer.
Yeah.
The contractor, when we'll plow it, I saw the DIs that you're talking about. That
Well,
are there.
yeah, but there's absolutely nowhere for snow to go over the side of the bridge. There's concrete walls all the way along.
We'll have to try to throw it and figure it from there. It'll
Yeah,
be the first winter with it.
It's just going to make a lot more work for you guys.
My concern, well, true, but my concern too is where does that water go to?
Yeah.
And making sure that we keep those DIs clean so that it does have a runoff for that.
Yeah, that's
so we were informed that, you know, the contractor's here through the winter. So there's still work to be done. So if there are any of those little things that pop up like that, at least the contractor should still be on site that we can help address that. And also too, with the lights, I know we received inquiry about the brightness of the lights, and we're looking at that. And looking to see what they can do for the brightness.
My concern more about that. And then one other thing I had for you, John, is has there been any follow-up from Abundant Sun on our strategic vision workshop that we had out in West Hartford earlier this month?
Not other than providing me with a list of all the
Abundant Sun, is it?
future projects.
Prism, sorry, Prism.
Other than me receiving 5 or 6 pages of a summary of what the group agreed to as future goals, I haven't heard.
Okay, all
I
right.
didn't know that if we were expecting anything.
Yeah, Kim, do you have something on that?
I mean, I can just say that the hope is that we can take that information. They provided the information, but they were not contracted to graphically transform it into something we did for the 2019 one. So my hope is maybe I can work with JD or someone to try to. Yeah,
that made a really good presentation piece for the residents of the town of Hartford to see what the strategic was, and good way to move forward with presenting it to the townsfolk. So, yeah, and that's it.
Kim, did you have questions or comments?
Yeah, on the just from the SIGAX, the parking surveys that are being done, it was indicated that it was almost complete. Anyway, I guess I would like to formally ask the board if we could request just an update on that once the report is complete. Like the planning director said, if the select board wants it, so I'm asking the select board if we can request an update, a report on the parking survey, most recent parking surveys.
Board, thoughts?
Sure.
Great.
Yes.
And then, I guess just also maybe, and this could be done offline, but we have time before the hearing. So, with the new bridge, and I do understand that this is one of the first one of that design that's been done in the Northeast. So maybe that snow removal is a real consideration, but do you know, just like, I'm sure it's already scheduled as to when they're gonna, either the town or the state is gonna paint the stop lines, the lines?
Stop bar lines?
Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Honestly, I mean, I think it's gonna make a big difference, just because people still don't quite get to that. I mean, the four-way stop, even when it was a three-way stop, so just having those
I can
painted
certainly
bars.
make inquiry of the transit that's on the checklist.
It's gotta be, but I just didn't know who was. I was curious as to when we might expect it. That's all for me.
Questions or comments for John?
I have one more.
Randy?
I just noticed, what's the status of the,
We do have, I think Dylan presented a set of options, and it seemed that the preferred option from Dylan's perspective was to go with contractor X at an approximate upgrade cost of $60,000. And we're going to discuss that, I think, within the context of the budget season to determine whether we want to try to find a way to finance that in the upcoming budget, or perhaps present it to the voters as a lot item. There's a lot of people throughout the town have commented about the quality of our audio-visual presentation who would benefit from the upgrade. And so we generally try to use lot funds for things that benefit the broader community. So that could be an option.
so until election, we're basically gonna use the owl?
Yeah, that's.
I guess.
Or the fiscal.
Questions for comments for John? Okay, thanks very much, John.
Sure.
We have some time before the public hearing at 6:30. I don't really want to start it before 6:30 since that was the advertised time and people might be waiting to come on. So we can, it looks like, do one of our other agenda items.
Item B is, I believe, ready. We have Lori here from the planning department.
Yeah, Lori, if you can take us through that, it'll just. It'll be so coherent.
Okay, so the agenda item I'm addressing is the contract of work for engineering services for one of the properties that the board previously approved to go forward as part of a hazard mitigation buyout. That's under the federal FEMA program, and also under the state's Vermont Emergency Management Program. That property is 361 South Street. It's one of the properties that has a landslide and is greatly impacted by that, to the extent that the property owner was told by the state geologist to vacate the properties last December because of the urgency and unsafe conditions that existed at the site. That's been monitored over time by the Department of Public Works as well as the fire marshal. Department of Public Works put a tarp over the area to help minimize the amount of erosion that would occur and destabilization every time we had some kind of a weather event. And my understanding is that that has helped tremendously in terms of that. Property owner vacated that property, and as a result of the conditions that are on the site, when the state put in the request to the federal agency for the buyout program, it was clear that when we received the grant that it was not sufficient to address the site stabilization, and those issues were tremendously impact the way in which the property structures would be removed, as well as any stabilization of the site post demolition. So as a result of that, in April of this year, under the situation of an emergency type of conditions, the Department of Public Works did obtain an emergency quote and evaluation of the preliminary evaluation of the conditions that would be necessary to evaluate in order to do a more in-depth energy engineering analysis. That was done by D&K. That information was forwarded on to the state in order to give them documentation of what would be the demand for additional services just to do the engineering work. In addition to that, the Department of Public Works also put together a very, very preliminary but necessary document to at least give a ballpark idea of what the construction, the added costs would be to the site demolition process in addition to the engineering services. That information was all put together. The state made a determination that they had sufficient enough information in order to go forward with an application to the federal agencies and to the upper people within the Department of Vermont Emergency Management to ask for additional resources. And that additional resources was outlined within your document. I also want to make note that there were some typo corrections. Thank you, Kim, for catching those. So a corrected version was presented to the board, hopefully, and you did get that. And that was just unfortunately a typo that got carried over. But in that memo, it basically identified that $216,950 more was going to be put in at this juncture. That's not to say that additional information that we would garner from the engineering services would provide more clear documentation, not only to the state, but also to the federal agency, that there would be enough to do that. So I'm coming before you today to say it's time for us to do those engineering services because it's a critical piece of whether or not or how we could go forward with this. And then the additional funding that is most likely going to be necessary, that we're going to need that engineering services to document that additional funding need. So this is sort of a strategy that the state put together with us in order to say, okay, let's get the money now that we need for this engineering services. It'll give us the documentation. We can go forward with that in the future. But on a low end, maybe we don't need anything more than this. So the way that their estimate is broken up into two parts. There's 75% of it is a FEMA request. And then there's a 25% non-federal match, within which at this stage, we're very fortunate to have the state is going to cover 100% of that. If we look at the money, so the question obviously comes up with how much is committed at this juncture, and that's something we wanted to be able to establish with the state. And they did provide, which I put, excuse me, I have something in my eye right now. The state did provide some documentation, which I included in the memo, which states that they are, it's actually a very strange way in which they go about doing this, but they've put the letter into the FEMA on October 15th, which basically said, we're asking for this additional amount of money from FEMA. In order for us to be able to do that, we have to document to you, FEMA, that the state has committed the matching dollars. So the amount that you're seeing in this local matching commitment letter is the new total amount. So there's an increase, but the thing to make note of is there's $142,000.49 that actually is being committed, has been committed by the state. The state has gotten back to me in correspondence to clarify very clearly that that is a committed dollars to this project and that we can go forward with the engineering services, knowing that we have at least that amount of money. And it will cover the $115,400 that we are estimating at this time in the proposal that we've received from D&K. So I'm coming before you for two reasons: to actually review our procurement requirements under the guidelines within the town's procurement guidelines. You would need to make an exception for our procurement process because of the amount under the situation of it being urgent and necessary for us to go through the process that we did, which does not follow it to the T. You have the authority under the procurement guidelines to actually make that as an exception. And the second part of the request to you is to authorize the town manager to execute. Well, actually, for you to award the contract and then for the town manager to execute the contract.
Couple questions, Lori. How soon will we know if the FEMA funds are confirmed? How long does that take?
Well, we don't know exactly in this at any time, but in the past, they have felt that it has gone all the way up to the top. They have had communications before the written documentation was sent. It could be a month, it could be 2 months, 3 months. But that would track fairly closely with the timeline for the engineering that analysis that's going to be done. So I don't think we will fall into a situation where we will have a full engineering analysis and not even have that this initial one. But it's never a solid, but we
Right.
do have enough money to go forward with the engineering from the state.
And this doesn't impact anything about, this doesn't impact the homeowners buyout agreement with FEMA?
Well, we will have to get, we're proceeding on a parallel track. Normally, the process is that we get all of this stuff resolved before we acquire the property. There is a process we can go through under the circumstances that if the urgency arises at a certain point and we can document that to the state, we can go forward with a purchasing process. And we're just going full ahead. We have an appraiser, they're already doing the work that they need to. We'll make the necessary arrangements so that when we need to, we can pull the plug and do the acquisition. So I don't want to make any promises of when that's going to be because there's
Pull
such
the
an
trigger.
unknown.
Pull the trigger and make the acquisition.
Okay, and pull the trigger, yeah. Not pull the trigger, I apologize.
Yeah.
And so, but I can keep you updated certainly as we go along on this process.
And in the meantime, the source of the 115,400, is that funds that are already secured from the state?
Yes.
Regardless of what FEMA comes through with,
Correct,
so
yes.
that's where those funds will be sourced.
Right, it
from.
would come out of what it was quoted as their commitment of 142,000, that amount.
Thank you.
And the commitment of staff is to continue to treat this with great care, not to expose town tax dollars. This is a FEMA process, working with the state. We are the conduit. So at each step, we're making sure that federal and state resources are there so that we're not obliging the town to incur any costs. Fair to say?
Yes.
Benny?
Hey, Lori, am I understanding this correct, that this is $568,199 only for engineering studies?
No, that includes the engineering would be 115,400. It went up from the original bid because of, and I think I explained that in some additional cost.
All right, and the remainder is supposed to be for the actual mitigation?
Well, the actual, yeah, the mitigation, which would be removal, excuse me, which would be removal of the structure as well as some additional remediation. If that, but we haven't been able to establish how much more that would be outside of the, you know.
So does that
minimum.
include the bank stabilization?
Bank stabilization is what we're looking for the engineer to tell us what is it going to need to be and what is the cost of that's going to be.
Okay,
And then we would go to, and anticipating that may be more than what's already been reserved.
and when we find out if there's more reserved, is that something we can reapply to FEMA for?
Yes, and in the memo that I've received from the state, as well as I put in the memo to you, is that the state anticipates that we will need to go back, and they have already identified that within their communication to the state, to FEMA.
Do you make, this is a question you probably don't know the answer to, but I'm gonna ask it anyways. Do you know what the tax value of this property is?
That's what we are waiting for, the appraisal
Okay.
right now.
That seems like 568,000. It seems like a pretty good chunk of change for what the property is. I mean,
Well, there's demolition, that's not. you
well, I
know,
understand that, but I
right,
mean,
right.
just based on the value of the property, it's just,
And of course, there's also a concern about what you'll find out about the property itself, whether there's environmental hazards associated with it.
Right, and those
I
are all
understand
standards.
asbestos perhaps.
Right, because the demolition includes all remediation prior to demolition if necessary, all remediation post demolition. That's pretty much a standard thing. There's allowances within the budget for legal fees and all of the things that you would typically expect in purchasing a home. And they have allowances for disposal of hazardous waste and all of those things, doing the environmental
Yeah,
review
just-
they've already done.
It's just nice to know that this is not coming off the tax bill, not the taxpayers' bucket. Thank you.
Any other questions for Lori? Otherwise, I'll take a motion. All right,
I'll go ahead and make the motion. It's as stated, as you gave us in the packet, the action requested. I just want to make sure before I make the motion.
Yes, yes, and
Okay.
because it is the $400 has been
Right,
added.
and
into
you want
that.
me to add in asking the town manager to
Yes.
execute the contract? Okay, I'm ready to make that motion.
okay.
Uh,
Hold on, we have someone commenting, I believe. Okay.
With all due respect to the whole process, I'm just really struck by the fact that, you know, I'm not gonna argue that you guys are a conduit to insanity, but, you know, okay, great, it's federal money, FEMA money, it's not tax money, but if you really step back and look at it, as perhaps he was touching on, like, what if you didn't do any of this? Like, you know, okay, well, we'll do it and we'll approve all this state money and FEMA money to do this and that. I get what you're trying to get at, but it just seems kind of insane to me. And what are the alternatives? Like, is there another pathway where you can make this perhaps homeowner whole, but not go through like this soft cost engineering regulatory money fiasco? Just throwing that out there.
Thank you, Tim. Anyone wants to respond, they may. Lori?
I could just respond. The basis of the hazard mitigation program is to remove a hazard and to remove an area that may have repeated incidences of impact as a result of natural or events that have occurred. The side benefit of it is that it's a buyout of the property to the property owner, but it's not, the intent is not to make the property owner whole. So we enter into these projects because there is a risk to the public in terms of repeated costs associated with that. And that's why FEMA takes on these buyout projects, knowing that these are areas that are sensitive to, in this instance, it does pose a public risk. If that building goes down, it can have a more of an impact on the roads. It can have more of an impact. And I'll let you maybe talk a little bit more about that if you want, but those are the things that are the basis for going through the buyout program. The side benefit is to the property owner is that it's being bought out. I will tell you right off the bat that the amount of expenditures that the individual has had to go through just to deal with this has been, you know, far above than they'll ever get recovery for, because those are personal expenses of having to move out of the home and things like that. So, and buying and having to pay taxes on a property at the same time that they're actually paying rent on another property for a period of time, or, you know, having to buy another place to live. So.
Thanks, Lori. Annie, and then
Yeah,
Gary was
I wanna-
making a motion.
I want to sort of appreciate what you're saying, Tim. When I look at, you know, one building that seems like we could wait for the ground to freeze, go in there with an excavator, tear this thing down and get rid of it. Just seems like $568,000 is a lot of money. And $568,000, even though it's not coming out of the town's tax funds, it's coming out of everyone's pocket. Every single person pays federal taxes and state taxes. So this federal share and the state share, some of it's coming out of our wallets. So it makes you really question, when we get all these grants and comes down from FEMA, we may not see it directly in our tax bill, but we're all seeing it in our wallets. So I think maybe that's some of what you're alluding to, Tim. Am I correct? I mean, am I hitting on some of it?
I know you guys want to move on, but what I'm getting at is the idea of like, sometimes in the spirit of Vermont local communities, we could come up with a formula where we could just write an individual owner a check acknowledging that their house is no longer occupiable and move on for a price point that, yes, we eat it locally, but it's more sensible in the spirit of Yankee frugality.
Yeah. Mary, are you making a motion?
I didn't know if Chris was gonna.
I was just gonna say, Lanny, from the Department of Public Works stance, we try to look for a public good when we get behind a project. There is an environmental issue here. You can write a check for the house and the hazard is still there, as Lori said. The other thing is we always talk about steep banks in this town. We're an old, even Wilder's not that old, but we're an old river town and we're built along rivers and streams, too close in many instances. And we don't have a lot of pollution control on our outlets to these streams. This particular stream in particular, if you ask me, has water quality problem. If you travel Hartford Ave in the spring and you watch how brown that brook is and how it's pouring through there. So the stream that it's along has erosion at the bottom and erosion at the top. They're both induced by human activity. If we own this parcel, our request was that that slope be engineered in a way that gives us access to the bottom, which we currently do not have. And we do find out a lot about, there's a lot of geotechnical in this, and we find out a lot about that slope along that whole corridor. So it will provide future access that will control to that to help other property owners to remediate issues at the bottom. So our way was to find a public good for this beyond just that one homeowner and cleaning up that one spot. And there is another grant available for stormwater mitigation projects. I've been trying to find the time to investigate it and look at the interstate drainage and mitigating that, because that is a large issue that causes erosion as do our neighborhoods. So it's a small step in the right direction if we're going to tackle the whole issue and protect all of that tax grand list value along that stream.
And if I could follow, so basically, I mean, once the buyout happens, the town owns that parcel,
I understand that.
right? So if we can get these dollars to fix it and not have it come out of our pocket here right now, I think there is a benefit. I get what you're saying, Lanny, that we pay for it one way or the other.
Yeah.
But right now, though, as Chris highlighted on, is that we don't want to take ownership of that parcel in the condition that it is without doing that additional slope stabilization with that. So, so at the end of the day, we did look for the best venue to, tackle the things that Chris was looking at for that too. It just comes at a cost.
I mean, I spoke in the past about there's no sense in ripping out the house without stabilizing the bank. So I spoke about that. So I fully understand that. Just seems like it's a big chunk of money for what seems like fairly straightforward projects.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll take a hand on Zoom and we'll do a motion and start the public hearing.
Go ahead, Marie. Marie, go ahead.
Sorry, here I am talking. I didn't unmute. What is the address of this property? I guess I've missed this.
361 South Street.
361? And they're gonna tear the building down?
Yep.
Why don't they
Yes.
just burn it down? Just a suggestion, then they won't have to enforce the bank. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie.
So the reinforce the bank.
Okay, I move that the select board approve an exception to the town's purchasing policy and procedure under section 3.7 to obtain engineering services to address severe slope failure and erosion conditions at 361 South Street for public safety and providing information to the state and FEMA to obtain assistance to address these conditions. Number 2, award a contract to Dubois and King Incorporated in the amount of $115,400 to provide engineering services as specified in the May 28th, 2024 proposal from Dubois and King for 361 South Street. And number 3, to direct the town manager to execute the contract.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second from Kim. Discussion? Man?
Yeah, just to address Marie's concern, you just can't burn buildings down nowadays, Marie. Buildings have to be vetted to make sure that you can burn them. There's all sorts of materials in building that are non-flammable, and we don't want town staff to be breathing any of that stuff when they burn it. So the best way to deconstruct, to get rid of buildings is to deconstruct them. And with that said, if you did burn a building down, you're still gonna clean up the mess, and you're still left with a bank that needs to be stabilized. Thank you.
Any other discussion?
Marie's got her hand back up.
Move the motion.
She put it down.
Okay, so we have a motion and second. Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks, Lori.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a public information hearing on the Fairview Terrace and Gate Street bond vote article. I'll turn it over to John and the crew. We'll do a little PowerPoint, then we'll take comments from the public. Just a reminder, if you want to comment and you're in the room, please come up to the microphone and state your name and town or village resident. And again, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. So I'll turn it over to John.
Just, Mr. Chair, can I also remind people, if you haven't signed in on the sign-in sheet, please do so. Thank you.
In the back of the room. Hello, everybody. I am relatively new to Hartford, but I gather that the future of Fairview Terrace and Gate Street has been a topic of community discussion for a number of years, ever since a landslide prompted the closure of Gate Street several years ago. The Select Board has tasked me to work with the Department of Public Works to bring to the Select Board and to the voters a proposal to stabilize the hillsides involved, to reconstruct Fairview Terrace and a portion of Gate Street, and to reopen Gate Street for one-way downhill traffic. On the November 5 general election ballot, there is a bond vote article on which the town's voters can express themselves regarding this $4.1 million bond proposal. Tonight, I am joined by DPW Director Brian Gazda and DPW Assistant Director for Planning and Permitting, Chris Holsworth, who will describe the project for everyone via a PowerPoint presentation. I believe we also have an engineer from Dubois and King, Chris Lathrop, available via Zoom for any technical questions that may arise. So, Brian.
Thank you, Town Manager John. And I'm going to turn it really over to Chris. This has been a project Chris has been working on since I've been here. When I started in May of 23. I know there's been other presentations in regards to this. So this is for the bond vote. And Chris has put this PowerPoint presentation together for the public and for you, for the voters. And we'll move forward with that.
I'm sorry, can you say again, where is Chris from? What's his affiliation?
Du Bois and King.
Okay, thank you.
All right. All right, so tonight's topic is going to be just basically facts, and all this information you can find on the town website under Department of Public Works, Highway Division, and or go to construction projects. If you Google it, it'll come up. So topics tonight are going to be the general project location, the extent of the project with regards to the permanent improvements, a brief discussion of the project history. Important because many of the board members here were not part of the boards that set the path forward on this project. The project design concept, a little bit about how we got there, the cost, projected cost, the funding, and of course the article, and then questions. So the project location for this particular project is centers on retaining walls, which we dedicate as 1A, 1B, and by association of global stability, wall 3. Wall 1A is actually below Fairview Terrace predominantly into the back of the Bugby Center and a few of the residences on Maplewood Terrace. Wall 1B is below Gate Street in the hill section, which is the one that prompted most of the concern. And that is right behind 24 and 22 Maplewood Terrace. Wall 3 is on the opposite side of Gate Street, which holds the slope coming off of Fairview Terrace, which I call the extension of Fairview Terrace. There it is. So the project extents and are shown here highlighted in green and a couple different variations of gray. The green represents the stabilized slope, which will be constructed of a rock slope, but will actually be infilled with topsoil and then seeded and grass established. If you look down at the top of the green, it's actually the bottom of the slope. You'll see a narrow gray line going through it. That is what we call a toe wall. It's a precast concrete wall that mimics stone, and that softens the slope into the backyards and limits the impact on the neighboring properties. The dark gray is Gate Street and Fairview Terrace, where it's essentially reconstructed going up the hill and in front of Wall 1B on Fairview Terrace. That also has a light gray on top. That is a new sidewalk for pedestrians that will have improved lighting for the pedestrians and the traveling public. So a little history here, and this is all on the website. And if you hit the hyperlinks on the website anywhere, you will get to all of the highlighted in blue documentations. In 2003, the previous select board at the time contracted with Knight Engineering out of Burlington to conduct a study on the walls and options, conceptual options to stabilize the walls, the roads, the slopes. It's a global stabilization. It's not just the walls, it's everything attached to it. At that time, it was obviously a little controversial, so no action was taken. In 2017, traffic was closed to the street over growing concerns over wall movement, perceived loss of stones from a dry laid stone wall that sits below a poured concrete wall, and it was closed. Subsequently, after a little bit of monitoring, it thought it was safe to open it back up to one-way traffic down the hill. But then in 2018, 2019, some more monitoring was done by Pathways out of Lebanon, New Hampshire, and there was growing concerns over horizontal movement of the wall, and that being particularly Wall 1B. So in the recent history, with the select board's approval, we developed a concept from the options presented for a one-way street going down the hill with pedestrian improvements, and developed a request for proposals from engineers to get the project going. So in 2022, after a lengthy RFP review process and securing of the funds, most importantly, the town hired Du Bois and King to do the civil, geotechnical, and structural engineering of the project. They presented us with some refined options to choose from. We came back to the board with those options. And that's how the toe wall with the precast concrete blocks were picked. Some of the other options included sheet piling at the bottom. There are concerns for the historic residences nearby not being able to withstand the vibrations of that endeavor. Sheet pile walls at the top is impractical. We would have to move all of the utilities at the top, overhead utilities to handle that. So with the select board's blessing, we moved on to the toe wall, block toe wall, and developed some plans for that. This gives you a view. There's a larger view of this online. This is the overall sketch from Fairview Terrace from one of the residences going down to the Bugby Street parking lot. You can see how it's a rock slope going into a toe wall. The wall at the top of the hill, which is failing, is removed completely. So that cost is removed. Moving on to the tighter area, this is in the vicinity, not the closest point to 24 Maplewood Terrace, but it gives you a view of stabilizing wall 3, which is on the left side, just below the trees going up Gate Street. Shows you a car in the street, a pedestrian walking up the sidewalk, obviously the pedestrian fall / guardrail, a shorter section of stabilized slope to a toe wall at the bottom facing the parking and residences on Maplewood Terrace. So for a concept of what, say, that would look like, this is a similar project. That is the type of wall that is been designed. There are various shades. You can have them stain different colors to mimic different rocks, so forth. There's different face options, but that generally is the look of it. And that shows you, in that case, they left stone. So we've shaded it green so that you can envision what the slope would look like with grass on it. So the cost. Right now, the projected cost is $4.1 million, including easement acquisitions. That's legal, cost of easements, everything in. The base construction cost, that's before any contingencies are used. Construction administration and resident engineering services, along with the contingency. Funding is proposed to be through the Vermont Bond Banks program, the pooled loan program. It can be budgeted through either a 20-year or a 30-year term note. I will note that those actually last 21 and 31 years because the first year you're paying interest only. If approved by voters, the first payment is March 01/25 with 3 interest only biannual payments. And then on 5/01/25, ending there. And then the first principal and biannual payments begin on 11/01/26. The current interest rate for the 20-year loan is 3.64. The current 30-year rate is 3.98. So the particular strong point here is the total interest payments would total $1.68 million on a 20-year note. On the 30-year note, you add basically $1 million of interest to your debt load there. Just under $1 million. So as you, if it passes and you go through your budget process for 26, that's where those come into consideration. Whoops. So online, you can get to the schedules, cost and funding, which is basically going to go back to the payments. You're roughly paying on a 30-year note $218 on average and $279 on average for the 20-year. Most importantly, probably to the audience, would be what's the impact on, say, a $250,000 house? From there, we can see year 1 with interest only payments at $6.50 on a 20-year note. Year 2, 2 interest-only payments, be 2625 on that house. Year 3 is the big year when it jumps to principal and interest payments to 6150. 30-year note, the first year is 718, so slight increase. Year 2 becomes 2875, a $2.50 increase. Year 3, for whatever reason, it goes down to almost $10 on the house. So that's for voters to weigh and you to weigh as the board if they approve it, the impacts. So Article 1 is simply allowing us here to borrow up to the $4.1 million. Subject to if we can find any last minute grants or other sources of funding to lower that debt load. Then I will just say questions.
Thank you, Chris. And so we'll open this up to questions from the board and from the public. Jim?
Chris, could you speak at all to what kind of costs the town could expect if the bond is not passed?
Passed. Well, if it's not passed, can you share the photos of the existing wall on there? So if it, okay. I took some pictures today to put up there so that we can visualize what's there today. Here, I'll just give me 1 second.
What's it? Slideshow?
It's popping up in the way.
Can't take the wall out, my ladder's there.
You get that? Lights
You want me
on.
to start slideshow?
Yeah. Computer's catching up to us.
Oh, crap.
I'll be quick, I hope. when I-
No, I did the wrong one. Hold on.
Well, okay, so the slideshow's not gonna.
Yeah, it's not allowing
start.
me to go to,
Just
she wants to go back to the old one.
So, yeah, I'll just,
Top versus slideshow.
yeah, that's what we couldn't get to it. Keeps popping. You don't see it, but we have something popping up in the way, so I'll minimize it.
There we go.
All right. All right.
Well, there's a question pending from Ken first, right?
Yeah, which I'm gonna answer. So,
Sir, if you want to comment or ask a question, once this question is answered, please come over.
Yeah,
No, after we get.
well, I was told this was at 6 o'clock and it's 7 o'clock.
It was at 6:30.
It said, well, I was told by John, I was given the notice that it was at 6 o'clock, so I was here at 6
You
o'clock.
said that the public hearing would be.
At 6 o'clock, that's what it says in the email.
Concurrent.
So
with
anyway, I'd like to
board
say
meeting
something, 'cause
that
I gotta
begins at
go.
6 p.m.
Okay, go ahead.
I
Please
own this,
identify
State your
yourself.
my name is Timothy Thompson, I own this property, 22 Maplewood Terrace. Okay, I have no interest in having this project done whatsoever. First of all, the cost, when the engineers have been there, the minimum cost was $8 million. So $4,100,000 is way under from what any engineer that was there doing the inspection said, okay? Furthermore, we had all that water project done out here last summer, okay? And basically what happened is that it was a mess. There's construction, there's loaders, there's dump trucks. My house was built in 1920. It's in good shape, but it's, you know, to have all those that heavy equipment going by day in, day out. It's a rental property. You know, my tenants are going to be inconvenienced greatly. I may lose my tenants as a result of this construction. How long is it going to take? 2 years, 3 years? What's it going to take? Furthermore, we're talking about these walls here. That wall hooks all the way back up behind this house here. It goes a lot further. And when you get into this, you're going to be getting into a Pandora's box when you start pulling that wall out of there. I'll tell you that right now. My thought is, okay, first, and the other thing is that when traffic was there before, they fly up that road, 50, 60 miles an hour up Gate Street. There's young children that walk in that parking lot. I don't care if they're going up or coming down only. They're flying down that road. It is dangerous. And there's a lot of little children. And since that road has been closed, it's great. People hike, they walk, it's just a whole, the neighborhood is just so much better without that traffic there. But I'm afraid I'm going to lose money. My house could get ruined. You know, it's just ridiculous. I mean, I don't own the house outright. I rent it, you know, but I don't make a ton of money on it. It just sort of pays for itself. But, you know, if I lose tenants, I'm done. So, you know, that's about it, I guess. But I just think it should be reclaimed as a natural habitat. Get the road out of there. Just make it grass and trees and hike, and that's all you need. There's no need to fix that road. None. That's it. Thanks.
Good, thanks very much.
All right. I do appreciate the comments. I will remind that we are doing what we're directed, and this is a project based on life safety and issues that have been identified that we are liable for if we don't do something about. So into Kim's question, what is the plan if the bond does not vote? Previously, there has been no request for a engineered option 2. And I'm not sure any engineer is going to come up, unless you get rid of the road completely, something that is anywhere cheaper. But I'm going to discuss the issues with a plan B. So the wall fronting 22, which you just heard from, and 24 Maplewood Terrace is right here in front of you. You'll note there are pictures or signs on the wall saying caution for fallen rocks. That is because below that poured concrete wall you see there is a dry laid stone wall. On top of that dry laid stone wall, someone over time decided we're going to expand Gate Street and construct a retaining wall, poured concrete wall above that wall and expand the road. Obviously, the stone wall didn't meet any engineering standards, and the poured concrete wall on top of that doesn't meet any engineered standards. The only thing we could recommend, you know, as a plan B would be to try to remove the liability of the load on top of that stone laid wall and grade the slope back. Of course, we do have a sewer main in that road, and there is a main conduit for the telephone company in that road that I'm not sure. I think that one is one of the ones that handle a lot of the 911 calls. So for the whole state. So that kind of stuff needs to be relocated somehow.
Chris, can I ask a question while you're on that slide, please?
Oh, well, this one shows it as well.
That slide, can you back to the other slide?
I didn't go backwards.
Yeah, so if we went through the process of eminent domain and went with the process, the plan of the wall as was shown, how much would that encroach from where the poured concrete is now, or the laid stone? How much would that encroach into that property?
Just a few feet more than there.
Okay. So would it actually go beyond the town's true right of way?
Yes, because the toe wall's at the bottom of the slope.
Okay.
This road was developed and pushed out. Back then, it wasn't a big deal. This road was built, constructed, and the slope was extended onto properties.
What is the town's right of way on that road?
It is an old 3-rod right away.
3-rod is,
25 from the center line,
Yeah,
so
50 feet total.
25 from the center line of that road
almost, yeah.
is not gonna get you to where the new wall would be?
It may be right at the beginning of the wall, but as it goes on, no.
Chris has shown me mapping, identifying, I believe, 6 or 7 parcels from whom we would need temporary and or permanent easements. Temporary, at least to do the construction, and permanent, at least maybe to maintain whatever infrastructure is put along there, including a retaining wall, which would need to be maintained on occasion.
You know, this property 22 is probably one of the least impacted properties in the project. And one could argue it increases the value. I mean, it may take a year to build, but it should increase the value of having a stable wall about your property.
That's what I guess I'm getting down to.
Jim?
Can I mean, so we don't, you want to finish with this?
Yeah.
Is this
So,
gonna-
so then I want to, much forgotten becomes, because it's out of sight, out of mind, is wall 1A, which is next to Fairview Terrace. So I stood there, took this picture. I want to assume I'm 1.5 to 2 feet lower than the center line right there from settling. We're all familiar with the settling along Gate Street. There, we believe it's largely due to the fines slipping out underneath the stone wall. Here, it's got a concrete wall with not as many opportunities. This could be purely slippage on the hill. But I'm not the expert on that.
Has that been measured?
Yeah, I didn't have time to look it up before I came here.
Okay, well, you say
I think
slippage.
Chris is
so,
answering
you know.
Tim's questions.
Yeah.
right?
So,
Get that?
so whether it's been there, how long it's taken to settle that much and how much it ever sold, you would have to monitor it back to the beginning of time, Lanny. So you can only infer.
Right, but you don't know from when the
No.
monitoring first started to when it slipped.
No, that because that roadway wouldn't have been monitored, the wall would have been monitored, and the walls are moving. So 1A, because I know it's not at the forefront of people's mind. This is an example of horizontal failure in wall 1A. If you see that, that's midway through the wall. So you see that wall sticking out past the other wall. That's a vertical crack in the wall, and it's literally slipping out. This one, if I could blow it up, there actually may be a way. This shows you, you can kind of.
You gotta click on it first.
I tried. It's not catching up. Oh, there it is. There's a horizontal crack along the face of the wall, which is right in this area, and degradation of the whole face of the wall. So that top, I don't know, 3-4 feet of that wall is really breaking off of the bottom of that concrete wall slowly. How long it takes, I don't know.
This is over closer to Bugby.
This is, yeah, above Bugby.
So could you say what the vertical height would be at that point of that wall? How high is that at that point?
8 or more feet. So here is, obviously we have surface failures with the wall moving, the old guardrail that we're having trouble finding a way to reattach. And there's no way to stick a modern guardrail onto that wall. So the only thing we could possibly do is go out into the roadway ways and drill a guardrail. So these are some of the problems, just to give you a scope. So how to correct the bottom one, ripping the concrete off of the top of the wall, sloping it back, and maybe having a walkway if we can make the grades work over sewer and telecommunications. A price, I don't know. It's not something we can easily, I don't think an engineer is going to want to sign off on it exactly this wall. We can't sheet pile in front of it down into the ground because of other issues. We'd have to relocate utilities, so you're driving up cost again. The sheet piling's not cheap. The slope below it is in question for global stability that's been identified. That's why the whole slope is being reinforced. Every engineer I've talked to says, if you're just gonna modify the slopes and stabilize them, the surface stuff is incidental, the road, the sidewalk. How far back you dig to fix this issue, you're still gonna rip out roads and so forth to do it. So I've been told it's like either you fix the problem or you don't. Anything else you do to try to mitigate hazards is, going to be on us. If we're not going to engineer it, it's going to be on us to take on the liability, the risk of how to mitigate it.
Mary?
I always come to this question, and you may have already figured into this slope stabilization, but let's say we get, like we have every July for the last couple of years, let's say we get 9 inches of rain in a very short amount of time and nothing's done. Will that affect even more the stability of the slope?
It depends. You saw little vertical breakouts and so forth. We don't really have a way to fix that necessarily in-house, but obviously we go shove asphalt into cracks and stuff. It just takes the smallest little point, and we can't run around town fixing every little crack trying to avert a disaster. But yeah, anything like that can open up a new issue.
Thank you.
Is there anywhere the links in the slide deck that are in the agenda they're not live, like you can't link to them, but in the construction page of
if you go to the construction page, they're live in the outreach letter, they're live in this, but they're also just live on the site. If you follow the site, you can get all the history and links to all the documents.
Is that the DPW site?
Yeah, it's the construction site for DPW.
Yeah.
I've moved it to the top of the list, so it should be the first project you get on the construction website.
I guess what I'm trying to, so like the last, we have the estimates where the 4.1 million came from the July Du Bois and King estimate, right? Where they offered different estimates for different options and things. But is there there's not any drilled down? I guess I am curious as to how much of that 4.1 million might be allocated to those easement acquisitions.
I would have to backtrack and go back to the office and get that for you.
Okay, and then I think you already answered my other question, which is that if the bond does not pass, that the risk assessment is likely that the town is going to have to spend money on this one way or another, no less probably than $1 million.
I don't see it ever getting down to $1 million, but
okay, so potentially quite a bit more. Thank you.
So there would be cost regardless.
Right, and
Passes or not, something's got to probably be done.
I think the thing we look at then is, do we keep it as a road, right? I mean, what do we do with it? I think that has a lot of impact on what's going to drive cost. I mean, there may be some costs with the communication and sanitary that we have to deal with regardless of what we do with it. But at that time, do we going to reclassify it and not make it and have it be a class 3 group? You say if it's not asphalt road at that time, and do you go to that trail system and just make it a pedestrian walkway?
Which is still gonna cost us multiple
But
millions.
it
of
could be
dollars.
something we may be able to do in-house, so we may be able to help and do, maybe not all of it, but we could maybe do some of that work in-house. So,
Okay, well, at this point, we've already voted to put it on basically,
Yes.
my point is not to change options now. We've already decided to put it on the ballot this way. I was just trying to get a sense so that voters might have an idea. If the bond fails, there will still be significant costs associated with this
There'll be
area.
significant cost, and to mitigate, at Fairview, you can't change the classification and cut off access to residences. You're gonna have to mitigate in a manner that costs money to stabilize that. When it comes to the Gate Street Hill, there could be less of a mitigation. It will involve closing the road to traffic and reclassifying it probably to a trail, so.
Lanny, I'd like to also, before Lanny, this is a public hearing, so I would encourage the public to ask questions or comments. This is a $4.1 million bond that's on the ballot next Tuesday. So if you have something you want to say or questions you need answered, this is a good time to do it. Lanny, and then we'll hear from the public.
Chris and John, first thing is, can we get a link placed on the town webpage, the first page to this bond article? If we get that, so people don't have to search around for it, that'd be quite helpful. And then the other question I guess I had is, I don't remember when this came up before us that there was an option of putting steel sheets along wall 3. I know we spoke about the concrete and the stamped concrete on the lower section, but I guess I don't remember there being an option for both. And I'm not quite sure when you say infrastructure would be compromised or not compromised, but a nightmare due to infrastructure. We just put a water line up there. I understand that. I guess I'm a little irritated because I don't remember that being stated, the possibility of putting that metal wall up before we did that.
So Laney, sheet piling and ready rock or equivalent walls were presented to you and the rest of the board. Your concern was over the sheet piling rusting out and the life expectancy. And then it was chosen to go to the ready rock or equivalent block wall.
I understand that, but I mean, I didn't realize that I guess I didn't know we could do a little bit of both. And that was my fault. I'll take responsibility for that. It's just, I hear the concerns of the neighbors on Meadowwood Terrace. All right. And I know that if we put up sheet walls on wall 3, that would give us, we could push the wall back more and put those sheets in there instead. So we're still looking at one lane. We're not talking about changing the fact this one lane. Okay. What I'm getting at is there a possibility now to look at the putting one lane in there while pushing back wall 3 to give us some more room? Let me finish before you start addressing anything. Push back wall 3 with sheet steel and maintain good relations with the neighbors on Maplewood Terrace.
So the sheet piling was ruled out along the avenue of Gate Street due to the vicinity of the historic residences, and the vibrations would exceed the allowable.
Oh, yeah, I have a tough time with that one because I think if the residents had an option to have a street open wider, they would. I don't know how many of the residents were pulled on.
Well, that would put us on the hook for the damage to the houses or buying houses when we destroy them, so.
We have a bond question before us and a project. People in the public want to comment or question, this is the time to do it. Just please identify yourself and your town or village of residence.
So Crystal Pearson Moses, I actually live up on Hillcrest Terrace, so in the neighborhood. And I think it was 2 years ago, we kind of polled the neighborhood. And actually one of the asks of the neighborhood, which I know this impacts the whole town, was to, and I remember we had a lengthy discussion, was we would enjoy, it's an ask, to have one way down with a walkway and proper lighting. So just as a reminder is, that the neighborhood was polled for what they would like. Not everybody agreed, of course, but that was one of the outcomes.
Double
Thanks very
plan,
much.
double plan.
Questions, comments from the public? Tim? And then whoever wants to take them up next, please.
Hi, Sean Kelly from Quechee. So I'm probably really late to the party here in terms of this project. So I've heard about the project. I'm familiar with the project. I know this was studied quite extensively for years prior to a lot of folks in the room actually being here. So my one question would be, is it possible to split the project? And obviously there's already a bond vote being presented to the public, and it's in less than 2 weeks, right? So
No, okay, sorry, this one.
so it's going to be very difficult to change anything. So it is what it is today, and maybe if it doesn't pass, there's some other options. So I'll throw out some other options. You'd want to split the project, and then for the Fairview Terrace Wall 1A, I looked at the options. I did not review any of the reports, so maybe it was discussed, but at least in this write-up, it was not mentioned. In terms of 1A, one option would be, I'm an engineer, and I'm actually a geotechnical engineer, and I sort of know the lingo. So I'm just wondering if the option of unloading the slope was looked at by the consultant, and if it was, is the global stability okay with unloading the slope? So if you look at the detail that they drew up for Fairview Terrace slope stabilization sketch, and on the inset A, the existing wall is about 8 feet tall, and it's at the end of its useful life. It's dilapidated. Obviously, these photos show that, but you could cut out that section of wall as well as the road itself and replace with a lightweight material and unload the slope and not have to do the entire slope. So that'd be something I think.
Excuse me, can you explain unload the slope? What do you mean by that?
Sure.
For those of us that don't understand that.
Yep. For slope stability to be an issue, it's really just gravity that's taking over. So you have a slope, you have weight at the top, and you have resistance at the bottom. So the weight at the top could be unloaded by using a lightweight material. There are many options. Geofoam is one. Foam glass aggregate is another. There's many options. So I'm wondering, and it's probably not, the discussion is probably not even viable here just because it's already put to a bond vote. But if it doesn't pass, I think there are some other options that potentially could be less than 4.1 million, especially if you split the project.
Brian, Chris, any response?
I would leave that to our engineer to respond to. I mean, I
Yeah.
can tell you. Okay.
Yeah. Hey, Sean. I would have to double check with, obviously, as you're aware, Geodesign is doing our geotechnical portion of this. I do not remember unloading being looked at. And I think one reason was just the, how much, well, one of the criteria for this was to maintain traffic on Fairview Terrace during construction. And I, think that would be quite disruptive. But it's certainly, if something the town wanted us to look at, we could investigate that.
Thank you. I guess, there is always the question, what do we do if this bond vote doesn't pass?
We can certainly cross that bridge when we get to it.
Exactly. That is, I'd like to, we're here, we had a bond vote in a week. So if people have questions about the vote, about what it's going to cost, what the project entails, please, it's a good time to ask. Tim?
Hey, good evening. Tim Ferry, White River Junction again. I personally think this project is well thought out and a reasonable project in this community, and I appreciate all the work that you guys have done. The reason why I sat here tonight and am troubled by this is because I'm of the opinion that it's not so much the project itself, it's the timing. And I realize you guys arguably have already decided to present this in front of the voters, and that's your choice. But I'm of the opinion that taxpayers should vote on large expenses with all of them in a clear and comprehensive view. And what I mean by this is we have a looming crisis related to the schools and the CLA and different funding mechanisms that are in place related to our entire impact as a town. Both the school and town rates as they currently sit are way beyond both the median and average rates amongst our state. I've done the research on this and I'm kind of struck by it. I really feel like you, as select boards, cannot necessarily split money being spent and the source of a revenue and the will of the voters. And I feel like a couple times this has been mentioned, this concept of like saying, well, the voters, they really didn't mean that. They meant this and they just didn't want the money being spent that way or whatever. And I just think it's kind of like, you can't do that. You know, like as a governing body, you have to assume that the voters went in the booth with kind of a view of both their wallet and what they wanted to spend in this town. And I'm just really troubled by the idea that we're trying to push through a fairly significant bond vote without the other components known by the voters. Your budget in the next cycle, the school, and what other bonds they might have. So I just really feel like when I heard about this, and I'm like, okay, 4 million, and looked at the project and said, all right, we've talked about this for way too long, right? But I'm just really troubled by the concept of the timing, because I really feel that voters deserve a great understanding. Because John, you may say like, okay, on a 250K house, it's only going to go up this amount. And then the school says, well, it's only going to go up this amount. And then every budget cycle, every voting cycle, we as taxpayers face this. When I first came to this town, my taxes were around 3,000. They are now approaching, they're over 8,000. And they just keep going up. And I understand it takes money to run town and a school. But we have to kind of come to some reasonable kind of communication timing standard around this, because it's like when you guys approve or the school approves like a teacher contract or a police contract or a bond vote and everything's off cycle, the cumulative effect on the taxpayer is profound. So that's all. Just in the future, you know, really try and kind of step back a little bit on these things and not say, oh, well, we've been working on this forever. We want to push this through. And I really feel like it would have been more appropriate to put this on the March ballot, not on the November ballot. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Ma'am?
Kim?
A couple of things, and Tim, I respect you entirely, and I know we agree to disagree on a couple things. One, I'm not sure if I represent the entire board, but I know my position in one of the discussions we had around why to put this on the November ballot was less about pushing it through and more about the number of voter turnout that comes out in November compared to March, in that this is really important, that this is a very big project. It is going to impact the tax rate of all the taxpayers in the town, not just those in the neighborhood of Fairview Terrace and Gate Street, and that we would get a most representative, like a poll of the voters in the town. That was my personal rationalization as to putting it on the November ballot rather than the March ballot. That may be not the best thing. I appreciate your perspective, and keeping all the financial stuff together does definitely make some sense. And the criticism around, you know, when we put a question on the ballot that says, that the board has decided to do parking meters, and which is within our right to do so. And then we put a question on the ballot that says, would you like to pay for those parking meters with local option tax funds? And the voters vote it down. What they are voting against is the method of payment. And so when someone says the voters voted against parking meters, that's not factual. We had, as a body, decided to install parking meters, and then we asked the voters if that's how they'd like to pay for it. So then the rhetoric becomes, we said no parking meters, and that's just not the case.
Respectfully, how do you know that? How do you know that when someone?
Because the question we asked them was, would you like to use these funds to pay for this thing?
But it's a blend, yeah. I mean, it's
Fair,
a blend of like
totally
going
fair.
through and saying, A, do I want to spend this amount of money? B, do I want parking meters in White River? So I mean, to interpret that on your own without representing that to voters, I think it's disingenuous.
Well, that's why we were saying we should be more clear in the way that these things are presented to voters.
Public comment? Yep.
Hi, Kate Hagner. I live on Hillcrest Terrace, and I've lived there as long as this Gate Street has been a problem, and I'm really supportive of this project, as Crystal mentioned. This is exactly the kind of thing that's beneficial to the local neighborhood. But in particular, the comment I wanted to make is about just the reality that we're a river community that is also has this terrace kind of structured geographically. And it has felt like this project, like we keep kicking the can down the road, but these sort of issues around what the reality is of living along a banked community just exist. And as we see greater floods and other sorts of like issues, weather-wise, we're likely to just have more of these problems, not fewer. So I would just like to get it done now instead of kicking the can farther along.
Thanks very much. Nick?
Yeah, Nick Arvizu, White River Junction. I live on Fairview Terrace. I can see these pictures you took from my living room window, and I have noticed just regular degradation over the years, significant. That happens over 1 year. You can significantly notice the street sloping down, and I don't see how doing nothing like that one guy suggested would help at all. It would only probably make things worse. And then like I lived there for 30 years, so having this road cut off from the downtown is a little, not great feeling. I feel a little cut off from one of my hometown, basically. So I fully support opening it up to at least the one way, of course. And yeah, that's my 2 cents. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Nick. Any other public comment? Do you have anyone on Zoom?
No hands up at the moment.
Any, Brandon?
Yes, I just wanted to see if anyone in DPW wanted to comment on the first public commenters. This gentleman had an insinuation where he was saying that if we get into a certain part of a wall, we don't know what we're getting into. Basically, like that there was like an unknown that was going to cost quite a lot more money than we had anticipated. So wondering if anyone could speak to that.
I can't speak to what's buried below the surface other than to say it's a stone. What he might be referring to is that's a stone wall with a wall built on top. I mean, the estimate is to rip that out, a significant volume of material. I don't expect hazardous materials or something to that effect, if that's what you're wondering, but no, there's a contingency within the budget, and as long as it's done in a thoughtful process, I don't think the demolition part is outrageous.
Jim?
So if the bond does pass, when would negotiations with the property owners take place, and could that hold things up? I do remember when they were doing the roundabouts, there was significant delays.
It would get moved to the forefront and get underway.
Yeah.
And if condemnations were needed, that would be the process that would start to hold it up.
Like properties could be condemned because the stabilization is at high risk.
Yeah.
Man?
So Chris, other than the water line, which you moved, what is in there for infrastructure?
Drainage, sewer, and like I said, a main conduit for the telecommunications. One of the original.
Has that been mapped out? Have the utilities been mapped out that's underground?
Yeah, the telecommunications, which is a main fiber line, I think is really over.
So is it towards the edge, or is it?
Yeah.
So all that stuff would have to be disturbed?
Not all of it. We're trying to, it's been designed in a way to try to maintain as much of it as possible. The sewer won't be moved. We're hoping to slip line that, a continuous slip line through it to give it rigidness.
And line borings were done on this, correct?
Mhm.
And the line borings in the area where the utilities go up through, is that solid structure? As far as there's not sand or loose gravel or anything, is it solid?
The borings, they put borings into the roadway where it just shot down. There's voids.
There are voids.
Yes.
So okay, so as you said, I mean, that's one way you identify what's within the soil is doing line borings, okay?
Yeah.
That's why I asked the question that this gentleman was so concerned about, what you found when you did that, so that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, there's substantial loss of materials, so.
Loss, okay. Yeah.
Any other public comments?
Hi, I'm Keisha Denoyer. I actually live on Fairview Terrace, a little bit down the road from this. Sorry. I just wanted to say that I appreciate you having this hearing. I have been watching this fall my whole life, and over the past several years, seen more and more cracks. My child, who's present here, rides his bike daily, and I appreciate the thoughtful consideration to make sure that the residents in the neighborhoods above are safe, as well as the ones below, of course.
Thanks very much. Any other public comment?
Just have one more.
One more, Lee?
Yeah, I just want to make sure everybody knows that the town has a plan and we are committed to go ahead with this. So it's something we're doing. We appreciate the positive comments about it, but this is going to go forward. It all depends on how it gets paid for. We want to open that back up again. I mean, if this bond vote fails, it's going to cost us much more down the long run to do this. And people need to realize that the cost is going to continue to grow as we get further down the road if we don't do this now.
Tim?
I just have one more question that likely won't be answered tonight, but I've never really understood, both from the town and the school perspective, what our bond, there's always been this discussion that we've actually been way too conservative in Hartford over time with our bonding, which I totally get because it is a funding mechanism. So, if that's the suitable approach and people vote for it and we can do that, that's awesome. But it'd be really refreshing to have both the school and the town just sort of do sort of an overview for citizens on bond burden at this point in time and then kind of moving forward. Because we see both of them, right? But I've never, ever had anyone ever say to me like, yes, Hartford really could bond out at 15 million and we're only 5 million or, whatever that language is. So I know there's been some discussion. I know that the fiscal office has looked at that for Hartford, but I would really love it if we could get a citizen perspective on our level of bonding within this town relative to our grand list or whatever. And then the same thing on the school side. Very important information for citizens to see. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. I know we've had presentations before by the Vermont Bond Bank, which people have found very helpful. And I believe that idea that we are conservative when it comes to bonding is true. And that is great information and probably a way we can get that out there just so people know. Because, you go in and you look at a bond and the amount and you may just be like, oh God, that's just too much, and you really need to look at like the capacity we have and everything like that. So that's just a helpful, I think, public information.
There is no question about the fact that choosing to incur debt means that it might be that much more difficult to incur other debt for other needs. But certainly nothing that we've heard from the bond bank suggests that we're in any kind of dangerous place with regard to our debt load. In fact, they've said that in many respects, as Mike has pointed out, we are in very good shape along those lines. So yeah, every time you borrow money, you're incurring, there's an opportunity cost. That means that that's that much less you might be able to borrow for another project. But no, there's no indication at all from the bond bank that we're approaching a point at which borrowing would be substantially difficult for us in the years ahead. In fact, they point out in their email correspondence with me, that there's a 70% of our long-term debt is scheduled to be retired over the next decade.
Yeah.
I had her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I really appreciate the slide specifically that's about the impact on a $250,000 home and the taxes that might be incurred. And I just really don't want that piece to get buried, because I feel like that's probably one of the most pertinent pieces of information that voters can use to make their decision. So I'm just wondering, John, if maybe JD can put like just that one slide on our social media channels and get it out every way possible, and you know, soon, obviously before the vote. That would be excellent, because I mean, that just stands out to me as like, this one shot just sort of makes it all clear in terms of like, what is this gonna look like on my tax bill? And I know that just to contract, it hasn't always been done in other bond situations, and I think it's just crucial that we spread the word as wide as we can about, just so people can be informed about that.
And one of the other things that people have to remember, and I know that the finance director is tired of me asking a question all the time, is that we have bonds that drop off quite often on a yearly basis, not on a yearly basis, but they do drop off. And I know that I can't say it's 100%, but I believe we have bond dropping off this year. And so we're always going to be having things to bond. We're always going to be bonding things. And if we can keep a cycle of dropping a bond off and capturing another bond, we're doing really good. And are you looking at it, John, to see what's going to drop off?
No, I'm not, but I know there will be a presentation in the budget process about long-term debt.
So it's something that you're always going to be bonding, and you just got to face that. And it's worthwhile to do that, particularly on a project like this that is so fundamental to keeping downtown open. If we were to close this road, we would never get it back open again. So if it were up to me, I'd have two-way traffic on it, but it's not. So we're lucky to have one way.
Any other public comments?
So a quick one for process.
Sure,
Yeah,
Kim, and
I
then
think this to John, if the bond does pass, is it the board after that that decides if we do the 20-year or the 30-year?
Yes.
Okay, so that would be.
all right, any other public comment before we wrap this up? Okay, seeing none, anyone on Zoom?
No hands on Zoom.
All right, well, we're gonna wrap this up. Everyone, please go vote on Tuesday. And we will close the public hearing. The board will take a break for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and get to the other items on the agenda. Thanks, everyone, for coming out.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Chris.
Can we just sit here?
Absolutely. We'll be there for a while.
Thank you.
grant funding for the police department. I think we have Chief Sheldon online for that.
Hello.
Hello, Chief.
Basically, this is a JAG grant, a Justice Administration grant. This is the third year that Lieutenant Howe has applied for this grant, and it's the third time you guys have seen this in front of you. It's a non-competitive grant that we received every year for the last 3 years, and this amount is for, let me look at my paperwork here, my apologies, $11,502. We're looking to purchase with this grant money ballistic helmets for our officers. The current, as the paperwork from Lieutenant Howell says, the current helmets are expiring after 5 years. The new helmets he's researched and looked into now last 10 years with some new technology. So we're looking for a better product with a longer lifespan. But this is, like I said, a federal grant that you guys, we need your review on and your approval so we can sign this and move on with the grant.
Just one brief clarification. The amount of the grant that's been awarded is a little bit shy of that. It's $11,186, and the proposal was that the department find $300 or so from their operating budget to purchase the entire number that they had wanted to do.
Okay, any questions?
Thank you, John.
Questions for the chief?
Yeah.
Lanny?
Chief, what is, how often are these helmets used by the department?
Well, thankfully, not very often at all. They are used, they do don them and use them for certain high-risk incidences like search warrants for threats with a firearm. They're options. They're carried into cruisers with each officer, and they're assigned and fitted to each officer. So when I say they're not used very often, what I'm referring to is they're not actually, we haven't had actually a gun battle with the officers in these helmets, but they do use them all the time on duty doing certain high-risk calls in search warrants.
And when they say that the integrity degrades after 10 years, what does that mean? The integrity, what is it for the integrity that, I guess I'm confused on that.
I'm not really sure the exact specifics, and I have to get the manuals out on these things, but the current ones we purchased, the surface life is 5 years, and they won't guarantee that they're going to stop a bullet and save a life, the company. So after 5 years, they recommend replacing them. So the newest ones that we're looking at are 10 years.
Yeah. I realize it's all about officer safety. But I also get concerned about the fact that 10 years down the road, the burdens come to the taxpayers to have to replace these again. Can we look at a phased approach towards not replacing these all at once? Like putting money into reserve so that we can.
Yeah, we're replacing 14. We're looking to buy 14 helmets. We have 22 officers, or 21, and we're hiring a 22nd. So we're not replacing them all. They are in a phased in process. We tend to buy them as we need them when we hire officers. So we don't start the 10-year clock until we hire somebody. So we don't buy these and sit them on a shelf. We buy them as the officers are hired, but we are buying 14 with this money if approved. And then, we would obviously need another 9 down the road, but that becomes, I've worked with the Justice Administration grants probably for the last 20 years. So they're pretty consistent grant. Senator Leahy's office used to do the grants for us. And I'm not sure if it's Bernie Sanders' office that handles these now or Welch, but our senators do a good job of securing these non-competitive grants. The money's awarded. We just have to accept it, basically.
I see the need of these. I see also a need of putting it into a reserve fund, money into a reserve fund every year so that when these things come up, we can pay for them on a yearly basis versus all at once, because it's a big chunk of money if we don't have a grant available and we still need them for our officers. And
absolutely. I agree with you, Lanny. There was some money in last year's budget that we used for some helmets for new hires. So we continue to buy as we need, but we certainly can look at putting some money in reserves in the future because they're not the biggest expense we have, but they are an important one.
Yep, please, thank you, Mary.
Just a quick question, Chief. Said you have 22 team members that, and this would be 14 new ballistic helmets. My understanding is that These are different sizes. They have to be fitted. And what happens then? How do you adjust for changes in police department members?
You really can't. You kind of hope that, with some of the padding that they offer, that you can fit used helmet that's not expired to a new officer, or in some cases, you might give it to the chief of police who might not be on some of these active calls that's required. And the helmet might not be a perfect fit, but I'm at least likely individual to be out there, doing some kind of dangerous work on the street like the officers. So you have to prioritize your staff, but in general, you can not typically, I shouldn't say that. You hope to be able to fit it to a new officer down the line. But if it doesn't happen, then we have to buy one that does fit.
Thank you.
Questions for the chief? Not, I will take a motion. Mary?
Sure. I move that the town accept the FY 2024 Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistant Grant, JAG, in the amount of $11,186 to fund the purchase of new ballistic helmets for sworn members of the Hartford Police Department, and that the town manager be authorized to sign the US DOJ's related certifications and assurances document.
Okay, we have a
I'll
motion.
second.
We have a second.
I'll
We have a
second.
second from Lanny. Any discussion? Hey, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you, chief.
Thank you all.
Brainerd, did you vote?
Okay. Yes.
I vote aye.
Thank you.
All right, our next item, consider proposed use of Quechee wastewater reserves for leach field engineering. Chris?
All righty. Some of you may recall back during a capital presentation of the capital plan, I had mentioned that our annual inspections of our leach fields that require it through the indirect discharge program identified one leach field that was deemed to be failing, that we're now managing in a way to keep it from failing, but it's outside of the operational characteristics of the system as it's permitted for. So we are under order to evaluate and come up with a plan to remedy the situation. That being said, we got 2 bids for the services, and the services are trying to identify the source of failure. Is it excessive use? Is it biomet on the leach field? Or is it infiltration that's overloading it? And whether or not a previous leach field site can be used for a replacement site. If it can be remedied through upstream improvements or through a new leach field, that would be the preferred manner because it would be an all gravity system, no pump stations, no mechanicals to go monitor and check on constantly, just a gravity leach field system. The alternative, if those fall through, was to investigate the possibility of pumping to our municipal system and unfortunately using up some of the capacity there. To that end, the 2 bidders, one was MSK, the engineers you recently pre-qualified, and Du Bois and King, who is the third-party inspector of the leach fields. MSK was on the surface, the low bidder at $8,250. D&K provided a range of $7,000 to $10,000. MSK did not include monitoring. They kind of feel it's a waste of time given the age of the system, and everything over there needs to be slip lined. However, for us, for determining the proper way to correct the leach field issue, to quantify how much of that failure could be the responsibility of infiltration, it's an important piece of information, gives a baseline for further improvements in that area at the least. So their bid for that small additional amount more gives us a much more quantitative view of it and a more complete view. So definitely we prefer the $10,000 budget to get a better handle on it and to thoroughly examine it. And it's a good way to judge how it's going to work towards other leach fields that present problems. So we are asking, as this is an unbudgeted thing, to use the engineering reserves, which was set up for unbudgeted emergencies. So our recommendation is that you authorize $10,000 for this endeavor.
Question for Chris. Manny, this is not at the plant, right? This is.
No, so in Quechee, we own, I don't know if it's a dozen, we own several that are covered under indirect discharge, several that are not, leach fields, collection systems that go to leach fields. Do I agree with the fact we own some of these that essentially either serve a few houses or a condominium development? No, but we do own them and we are legally responsible for maintaining them in the environment that they affect.
Right, and this is the one that's by Birchwood condos?
It's below Birchwood
Right, below
condos,
Birchwood
yeah.
condos, correct, so, okay.
In a remote location, yeah.
Right, so at the worst, when an engineering study comes back, we may end up looking at replacing the entire leach field or tying into the main.
Worst case is tying into the main, having more electric. I mean, the cost to actually tie into the main and provide electric service to that site and develop a roadway to it, a more permanent roadway. Possibly having to have a generator backup and all that. That would be the worst case, is to actually go to the plant. The best case would be is that we determined that it was overloaded due to infiltration and stormwater, and then we would involve a slip lining project and cut back on that.
Is Sugar Hill on that too?
It's just the Birchwood condos at this point.
Okay.
There are a couple extra lots that are empty that could tie into it that are currently not.
Does Sugar Hill have its own?
Sugar Hill, you mean over by
Whatever the condo.
Willard?
I think that condo, the first condo, you go up past the police station, turn left. Isn't that Sugar Hill there?
You mean past the fire station?
Past the fire station, sorry. past the
That's
fire
Sugar Hill.
Yeah, Sugar Hill.
We're over, Birchwood is over off of Hardwood at Old Quechee Road.
Oh, okay, I'm thinking of a different complex then, okay. I'm thinking of the one that the town manager was, in. sorry.
The one down in the.
I'm in Quechee Hollow.
Quechee Hollow, my apologies. Birchwood, now I'm with you, Birchwood, okay.
He's on towns,
All
on
right,
the
my
municipal
apologies, my
system.
apologies, I understand. So Birchwood, that would mean a considerable distance to tie into Hartford, the Quechee main.
It would be a pumped system going up to Old Quechee Road through a field,
Yeah.
which we would have to get an easement for and so forth.
Okay.
That
now
would be
I'm
worst case.
Like trying to get my, okay, now my bearings. Been a while for me, so.
Other questions, for Chris, Ken?
Just a quick one, and then I'm happy to make a motion if that's possible. So I think it's got, the impact says it's coming out of contracted services, but the recommended motion says coming out of engineering reserves.
Well, it would be funded through engineering reserves. We would expense it through the line item.
Okay, so it's engineering reserves, but coming out of contracted services.
Right.
Ready for a motion?
I'm ready for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that the select board authorize the town manager to execute a contract with Du Bois and King for up to $10,000 utilizing Quechee wastewater engineering reserve funds.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second it.
We have a second from Lanny, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Our next item is engineering contract for Podunk Road Culvert. Chris, I think that's also you.
All right, so not sure, is everyone familiar with Podunk Road and the culvert? So Podunk Road, this is at the turn before Wildlife takes off. It's at the bottom, it's the receiving, we applied for a grant, so we did talk about this before.
Yeah.
But it is at the bottom of a drainage area of 1.6 square miles that shoots right down at it, 15% greater. So it's got a 5-foot culvert that has been proved to be inadequate. It's been dislodged from the site several times. Sustains quite a bit of damage. The post office refuses to deliver mail at times up that road because of the condition of it. So through the FEMA process, we didn't qualify for mitigation this go round on it. We didn't sustain any direct damage to the culvert, just the roadway around it, but we were encouraged to position ourselves for mitigation. We discussed the project with VTrans, got the grant as they assisted us with, and they found us 31,500. With our 10% match, that was 34,650. Under those guys, as we went out to bid, we did a very complete RFP, intending to, we want to be in position to get grants to establish this. There's only a few Hartford residents. There's a lot of Norwich residents off of being served by this. So our preference is, I know grants are a dirty word sometimes, but is to fund as much of this through grants as possible. So therefore, we included all of the environmental clearances, the archaeological, everything that would be required to establish a grant through a federally funded program. Those bids came in a little bit higher than the grant. So the first memo you received reflects that we were asking to approve task 1 through 6, because at the time talking with VTrans, we could then come back before July 1st and apply for the next round of grants, an amendment to get additional funding to complete the services. So that's in the first memo, which still stands, and we're going to ask you to move forward with that and get task 1 through 6 under contract. And we're going to recommend MSK. They were with geotechnical, which they both wanted. They were at 58 versus 68 for Du Bois and King. Then just the other day on the 28th, I received an email. We've been going back and forth with Chris Bump at the Department of Transportation. They think they have additional funding for us to complete the project entirely in this fiscal year. So what we're asking for on that one is to, it's a lot of Fs. We're asking you to allow us to apply for the grant, execute the grant, F awarded, and then interim finance the grant until it's, and cover the local contribution. So first one stands, second one is a lot of Fs. It's after we receive the grant, then you allow John to execute the grant, execute the additional contract amendment, so that we don't have to come back and do this all over again.
Questions for Chris, Kim?
I mean, that, it makes perfect sense to me. However, the new second motion hasn't technically been publicly warned.
Yeah, so I mean, we could come back in 2 weeks for that one. But I wanted to put it out there.
Would you know if the other one was secured within 2 weeks?
No, I don't believe so.
Maybe, you all set?
Kind of, I'm just like,
Go ahead.
in principle, I don't have any problem going forward with all this, but like practically, I feel like we should.
Okay, so my question is.
Let me just state that the select board agenda reads at item 5E, award engineering contract for Podunk Road culvert.
That's a good point.
Yeah, this isn't a contract for that culvert. This is just, it's worded to award contract, but this is not that. So I understand Kim's point. My other point is
A little bit. My point is just that we're that.
We got a new motion.
Yeah.
yeah, so my question is, and I know this is a sore spot, has this been vetted by our finance administrator? John?
I don't know that this particular proposal would, but generally speaking, whenever we have the opportunity for VTrans grants, which I think on a structures basis are 90% funded.
10%,
I'd have a hard time imagining that anybody would have any objection to the town incurring 10% local match. That's a great bargain for the town and the town's
I don't
taxpayers.
disagree with you.
Yeah.
whoever I know in the past that when there's been multi-part motions like this, the finance director has thrown up a yellow flag on them.
I can see a concern that we're talking a little bit, getting a little bit ahead of our skis with a lot of ifs and contingencies. I get that part.
Right.
But I don't know why anybody would object to the town incurring a 10% match on a big grant that we
Can this wait until our next meeting?
Sure. The only thing it'll hold up is John applying for the grant if you feel he needs your approval for that.
Often, at least I think it's practice in many towns in Vermont, that people understand that the town manager, while not committing the town to anything, should be free to pursue grants, subject to him then presenting a grant award possibility to the select board for approval. So I don't see why we would need to authorize the town manager simply to apply for a grant, but that's up to you.
I would be happy to make a motion to authorize town manager to apply for a grant amendment requesting an additional $19,980. I'll stop and then come back.
Yeah, that's fine.
After we get this vetted, is everybody nodding heads?
Kim?
But do we do still award the contract to MSK as well?
The first memo stands.
Yeah.
That would come back to us. That's what I'm getting at, is that if we put it in the works now, between now and next meeting, John could apply for the grant and we could get this vetted, fully vetted, come back before the board and go over the rest of it. And I think that's something that everyone could agree with.
Yeah.
I just have clarification as to what you mean by vetted,
Well, I'd like to have our finance administrator.
to see if the Gail has any concerns about it.
Yes. I really appreciate her input when it comes to things of this nature in particular.
Yeah, and of course, we run all grants by the finance.
But because she is the grant administrator for the town of Hartford,
Yes.
it's important for me to have her approval on anything that we apply for.
Sure.
So,
I get you.
All right, so either we can make a motion or not.
I'm gonna
It's
make a
open.
motion.
Lanny?
Make a motion, the select board authorize the town manager to apply for a grant amendment requesting an additional $19,980 for Podunk Road Culvert improvements, engineering.
We haven't done the first one yet, so
That's a recommendation though.
can it
That's what
go
I
out
said,
of
you
order?
said-
Does it matter if it's out of order?
I think ideally, we'd have the recommended motion with Lanny either as an amendment or as a follow-up
Well, I'm
motion.
not sure where you're talking about because this is the most I just read is.
No, I know, but in the packet, there's a recommendation for the original reason that this was on the agenda. This is a late breaking development.
So what page are we talking here?
Page 91. And then what you could do is just read that motion and at the end say, and that the select board authorized the town manager to apply for them. I mean, it's under $20,000, so it's not even in purchasing policy like in our purview.
Friendly amendment.
No, just make the motion.
No, make it friendly amendment.
No, because you're gonna start over. May I make a revised motion?
Someone please.
I'm
make
just
a
not
motion
sure.
that
Mike,
makes sense
Mike,
here.
would you calm down a minute? All right, and relax. Where are we talking about here? Page 91, right?
91.
You have to make
Okay.
this motion first.
I'm looking at I'm looking at the recommendation, but I'm not following what you're saying, Kim, within this.
So my suggestion is that you make that motion that's on page 91 and
Yes.
just add on to it that the select board also authorized the town manager to apply for a grant amendment for an additional $19,980. And then we go with that for now. And then if the grant gets approved, then we'll go for it.
I'm going to withdraw my motion and let you go ahead. Go ahead.
Kim, if you'd like to make a
'Cause I
motion, you can.
thought I read it the way it was supposed to be, so.
I mean, it's definitely, yeah, it's a little confusing. Mr. Chair, I move that the select board authorize the town manager to execute a contract with MSK Engineers for tasks 1 through 6 in the amount of $32,150 and to execute any necessary or prudent change orders up to $2,500, utilizing the funding previously approved by the select board on September 17, 2024, and that we authorize the town manager to apply for a grant amendment requesting an additional $19,980 for the
Second.
project.
Second.
We have a second from Ida. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
Very good.
our next item, consider proposed use of Hartford water reserves for wild domains engineering.
All right, so this one is a cleanup item to make sure that we stay on budget and complete the project in a timely manner. So the different group has been very patient with us through this process of establishing the existing service lines and utility line locations. We were supposed to, hopefully, we were going to be fully staffed, but we weren't fully staffed to mark out the lines and the services and so forth. Unfortunately, with only one licensed operator and one helper in the department and weekly water main breaks, we were unable to do our part of those services and locate those things. So we internally in-house mapped them out using ties and so forth, provided the information, and they went through the additional steps to map out all the existing services. That was a little bit pales in comparison to the issues of alignment issues in dealing with V-Trans to get us the best possible avenue to put the water main up Route 5 underneath the concrete highway, which they've helped us negotiate a cheaper method than going under the sidewalks and so forth up Route 5. The housekeeping part of that is those were additional fees. They may fall within the original budget, but they don't want us to anticipate that. They would rather be paid for the additional uncontracted task. And then if they stay under budget on the remainder like they think they are, then we receive that benefit.
Questions for Chris? Okay, take a motion. Mary?
Sure. I move that the select board authorize the town manager to execute a contract amendment with Dufresne Group for $9,250 utilizing Hartford Water Engineering Reserves.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second from Kim. Any discussion?
I do have just a comment because and for the record, Laney, I hadn't refreshed my agenda. I was looking at the old version of the agenda on my screen, and then Brendan pointed it out that we were looking at two different page 91s. But when I was thinking about the last motion and this one, I think it is helpful to identify the project in the motion specific to it for when anyone's looking at the minutes, when they're looking for something like, oh, when was that approved for that water main thing? Like, anyway, so that's kind of on us, but I would say just like for process purposes, and we were saying execute a contract amendment with the Dufresne Group, like it's not very specific.
Right.
So
Completely, I was going to make that comment because this is very, very generic, the way this is laid out.
right. I think we could be fine for tonight, but going forward, I think it would be really helpful if we identify the specific project, like the Podunk Road culvert or anyway.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion of this particular motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that brings us to board contract for solid waste monitoring funded with reserves. This is Brian.
Give Chris a break.
Oh, great.
So this is the semi-annually testing, water testing we have to do for the landfill and also the annual inspection for that. In the past, it had been done primarily by Stantec Engineering. There was a thought that with bringing on an employee that we would be able to do it in-house, but that's why there's a reflection in the budget of only $15,000 being budgeted for it. But we weren't able to do that. So to keep out of the notice of alleged violation territory, we need to get this done. This is mandated. We can't not do it. We have to do it. So we said we went out for it. We got the one response from Sanborn Head. And that's the proposal for the 34,000. If signed tonight, we actually have a deadline of Thursday that we have to at least grab the samples from the landfill and get them to the lab. And then they'll be back out again next May. And that's the cycle that we're on, is an October-May cycle from each year to do that. So.
Well, I think you just answered my question. So, because originally their contract says October 23rd, so you've arranged for them.
They're
to do
ready. I let them know
testing.
tomorrow. They'll be out to go grab that. They have everybody in lined up to grab the samples. So.
Danny?
How much would it take to send somebody to get qualified to do this in-house?
Well, we have an employee that we brought on that had done this for Stantec, but it just was a time. It's knowing the locations, it's knowing this. It took Sanborn we've already had to do our May testing, which we did back in September. The state to clear up a notice of violation.
So what you're saying is
it's more so having a staff time to do it, Lenny.
So we do have somebody qualified for it.
Well, they've done it in the past for Stantec, but it's just the staff time to do it. Okay.
Well, that answers my question.
So
we have the qualifications, we just don't have the availability to
For
do it
somebody
based
to do
on
it, correct.
criteria within the department.
Correct.
I understand. Well,
Questions for
It's
Brian?
not.
I guess I'll make a motion if nobody's got anything.
Nick?
Yeah, make a motion that recommend the town manager to execute a contract with Sanborn Head in the amount of $34,705 for water quality monitoring within the landfill.
Second.
Second from Ken. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you.
Is that the way you'd like it?
Yeah.
That's the way I would like it, yeah.
All right, now we're gonna listen to some options for improving West Hartford Library and water quality. John, is that you?
Yeah, well, I do have both Scott Hauser, I think, and Dana Clausen, I'm more confident about, both of whom had done a lot of investigatory work in the past relating to water quality at the West Hartford Library. And I know that at our recent retreat at that facility, people took notice of the discolored fixtures and wondered about the history of this. And not everybody was present for the history of the investigatory work that was done. Scott Hausler and Dana have looked at that history, looked at some options, and I think they're prepared to speak to that. If we can get Scott Hauser to walk in the room there.
Okay, so this is sort of an update about the history. We don't have a motion, do we?
No, it's just a discussion topic to bring everybody kind of up to speed on what has been done to investigate options for improvement of the water situation at the West Hartford Library.
Okay.
So thank you for coming, Scott. Dana's here. Thank you both for being here.
Whoever wants to kick it off.
Yeah, so it came to my attention early 2023 that the water there was discolored, it smells funny, and it's not really drinkable. So I contacted Artesian Well, they came and did a test. They said in general, the water all in that area is pretty bad. The test came back, there was high chloride, which they believe is from road salt, iron and magnesium, which is what gives it the color. They said that if they were to install a water purification system, that it would increase the chloride levels in the water and just make it totally non-potable. They didn't really, there was no confidence that a new well would get any different results. We can only put in a new well in certain areas, I believe, because part of that field is a brown field. So we don't have the total property to work with. And there's just really limited options. And moving forward with a new well, it just seemed like
Speculative.
Yeah.
And costly.
And no guaranteed outcomes.
Questions?
So, yeah, so talk a little bit more about osmosis, reverse osmosis, talk about filtering. Tell us a little bit more about what you discovered there.
They did mention reverse osmosis, I believe, to take the salt out, but then they said it would be up to maybe 20 to 30 gallons per day, which wouldn't be much. And it was getting into a really costly, would have gotten into a costly project. So currently, I believe Sandy's here. I think you bring water from home, is that correct?
I do, I fill.
Sandy, would you introduce yourself? And
Sandra Carey from the West Hartford Library. I currently bring water in to the library from my home well in gallon buckets. I used to go get water in the big 5-gallon things at Walmart because I do own a water cooler for the library. But I am not supposed to lift that amount of gallons anymore. So I stopped doing that and brought water from home so I can carry 2 gallons in, a gallon in each hand. So prior to that, I used to buy the water through a couple of different vendors, but it really got kind of cost prohibitive. And so then I went and got the water myself, and now I bring it from home. So I understand what's going on with the water there. It smells awful, it tastes horrendous, but we could very well be served by having water delivered. I could always ask my patients for help getting the 5 gallons onto the cooler. And one thing that's very important about the water is we are on the Appalachian Trail, and hikers come through there all the time. So they do sometimes take the water out of the hose, and I'm sure down the road they probably dump it out because it's so bad and it turns color, turns red. But it would be, in the summertime, we would need more water than in the wintertime to have the hikers. But that's the only part of the town of Hartford that these Appalachian Trail hikers see, and there's thousands that come through. So it's a small thing for us to do is to help provide some fresh water, not only for the library, but also we want to be a warming, cooling center. And so having water, clean, fresh water available is pretty important. And you've seen what it looks like and tastes like. I don't know if you tasted it. Did you, anybody taste it?
I smelled it, it was bad. So I guess I'm still not sure I'm understanding this, because it started out, I requested the town manager that we get an amount of usage out there first. Okay, that's what I started out with this thing, is that if we could determine how much water is used, that to me would be a starting point to determine what we needed to go forward with. All right.
And when you say how much is being used, do you mean for all purposes or simply for drinking water?
For all purposes, okay? Because we could, in my opinion, we could turn this, we could use reverse osmosis for flushing water and for hand washing, okay? And we could use bottled water for, we could say, put a sign out there saying bottled water available for inside, for Appalachian Trail hikers, and we could use that for drinking water. To me, this is something that we can do better, and we should do better. West Hartford doesn't have a whole lot of support from the town of Hartford, all right? West Hartford can have clean water, clean drinkable water that doesn't smell when you're using it in the laboratories or staying in the laboratories. It's a doable thing. But as I said, I think the first part, and that's why I wanted to go back to the basics, the first part is determining how much water is actually used on a daily basis. To me, it's not a lot to have a meter put in there, start at the ground level to determine how much is used.
Other questions or comments?
Wait a minute, I want this addressed. Just don't ignore this, okay?
Well, I'm from West Hartford. I certainly wouldn't ignore that. Thank you, Sandy, for coming in. I'm glad that you were here to mention your need for it.
I would like to have it addressed from our staff. Thank you.
Yeah, let me just jump in here. This isn't something that we've neglected to to think about over time. I mean, we've always dealt with the stained porcelain and cleaning and different types of chemicals to use to try to get the toilets looking clean. We took the time to get artesian well service out there to assess things, to look at things, to identify potential improvements. That's where we got the analysis here. And it kind of, at that point, it's like, okay, well, there's not a lot of options there. So I can't say that we forgot about it. I can just say to you that we know it's a problem and we're addressing things as we go. We can take and put a meter on, I'm sure, not knowing because it's a non-metered, well system. It's going to take a good amount of time to assess it, unless we want to hire a professional to come in and give us an estimate based on the number of visitors that come in the door on a daily basis during the seasons to determine how much usage we're producing during the summertime versus wintertime. So those are going to be all concerns. If Artesian Well Service said we could treat 200, 300 gallons a day, it's a non-issue. Let's figure out the reverse osmosis and figure out a way to make that happen. I'm sure we can come up with the amount of water of consumption. However, if we're purchasing bottled water, now we're talking about storage and all the above. We talked a little bit about putting in some type of water tank that can be treated, and large amounts of water could be brought out to the facility and piped in. But that's extremely expensive, and is it really truly feasible and going to work? So we can go to work. We can see about getting a meter installed to identify the amount of flow. We do know 20 to 30 gallons of a day could be treated with the reverse osmosis. 20 to 30 gallons. It's not a lot of water when you have a 2.5, maybe a 1.4 flush toilet. That's where it gets important for us to analyze the amount of people that come and go and the amount of people that use the toilet. If it's less than 30 gallons a day, then I guess it's worth it. So those are the types of things we need to spend some serious time on, and we'll figure out whether or not we got the expertise to figure that out.
At the very basics, though, we need to know the usage, and that's the thing that I'm getting at.
Well, that's going to take about a year if we're going to do that.
That's
So-
fine. This
okay.
is not something that's going to be, Rome wasn't built in a night, nor do I expect the water quality to be solved overnight down in West Hartford. But this is something that with technology today, we have the ability to make a difference, and we should make a difference.
I don't understand why we're talking about bringing in water for non-potable purposes. Why can't water be brought in for drinking and for our Appalachian Trail people and for our staff and for the heating and cooling center, and continue to use our existing water for washing in the sink and flushing the
Yeah,
toilet?
that's fine.
That would seem to me to be a good
No,
dividing spot.
That's what that's.
Doesn't resolve.
Well, the problem is, that the only problem with that being said is that the water we have currently still has the stain. Okay, and that's the issue that I guess bothers me more than anything else up there, the stain and the smell of the water. Because to me, it's a very poor representation of the town of Hartford to have stained appliances in a library that we're proud of. Okay, that is one of the things that people down on the Appalachian Trail see and others there see. And the amount that we provide for the village of West Hartford is minuscule compared to what we provide for other villages in the town of Hartford.
I wanted to weigh in that I agree with John on the point of separating drinking water from non-drinking water, toilets and hand washing. I think it's a it's an easy way to save money, and I don't think that the Appalachian Trail folks care so much that they're staining in a flush toilet. They don't always get a flush toilet. I will say that reverse osmosis is the gold standard of water filtration. So if we have a reverse osmosis system capable of handling a cooling center for lots of folks, and Ken at Valley Artesian should be able to design a system that would accommodate that. I think that is sufficient. I also know you mentioned adding like salts to the water, you know, in the filtration process. That is not reverse osmosis. These are two different systems. So let's just talk about reverse osmosis, I think, because so we don't add any more salt to this water. I know Ken from Valley Artesian personally. I work with him in my day job. And I know he's an expert on potable water filtration, and he will like get the job done. So like put in a recommendation to work with him as we're able.
All right, so what's the pleasure here?
Well, I think that missing point here is that even if we put filtration in there and we had large quantities, a higher level of sodium, okay, which makes it unpalatable to drink, that's not going to stay in our systems. So we could use filtered water for laboratories, hand washing, and we could have reverse osmosis water for drinking. We could have a split system. There is a way to make this happen, to have clean water for West Hartford Library. And it's something we should endeavor to do. I'm staying with this because I think it's the least we can do for the library and the folks in West Hartford.
Mary?
I would agree with both what Brandon and John said. I think, I think that I, of course, would want perfect looking water for any of the people working in any of the libraries. But I think that there comes a point at which, in looking at this, the iron level, which is part of the staining, is outside of the standard. The standard is a 0.3, it's 2.38. Manganese, 0.45 out of 0.05 outside of standard. It's not just the drinking water. And I think, we certainly could afford to help them out with bringing in drinking water. But I think, sure, if you want to spend the time to take a year and figure out how much water, I don't think it's going to change. It says they've just said that throughout the valley in this area, this is the same thing for everybody.
It is. And if you look at the runoff into the river around the bridge, it is all dark iron looking. Right. So it's from, say, Waweco down to right before the Podunk Brook that flows into the White River is all kind of in the same water system. So drilling a well on that property would find more of the same. You'd have to go beyond Podunk, on the other side, I think, in order to get potable water. And it's potable, it's just tastes terrible. So from my perspective, having been there for 8 years, I would be perfectly happy with drinking water brought in enough quantities to have drinking water. I have no problem washing the dishes in it. That does stain the dishes. They do turn yellow, and I think the manganese makes them gray. And if you put a yogurt container with a little bit of yogurt in the sink and put water on it, it turns gray. It's all these chemical reactions happen, and there's multiple reactions happening. The problem with using the water for the toilet and the sink is the staining, but it also eats the components within the toilet, so they have to be replaced on occasion. The back of the toilet and the tank itself sometimes needs replacement of the plunger things. I don't know what it's called. Right. But the inside, maybe you guys didn't look. But you can open the top to the tank and look down at the water in that tank, and it is bright red. It's like this, a little darker maybe. And it grows onto the sides of the tank. So you can periodically take a spatula and scrape that off and flush it down, and then it doesn't look quite as bad. But you know, the chemical reactions, the iron particles separate out when you add oxygen to the water and the air, and so that settles out into iron particles, so it's actually becomes a solid. So I just I'm fine with status quo as long as I don't have to drink the water, and I don't want to have to lug the water all the time. And I think it might be, you know, I think my opinion is it's more of a town responsibility to provide clean water for drinking, and not relying on me to do it. But I'd be perfectly happy with that, and I think everybody else would. And with becoming a cooling, warming station, we can only accommodate so many people in there. So it's not going to be like there's going to be hundreds of people, but there will be several people from West Hartford that will come there. And a year and a half ago or so, that storm we had, because the electricity comes down the Quechee West Hartford Road to the library, but that way it doesn't connect to this pole, and that way it doesn't connect. So all those people in that way, and all the people that way, were parking in the library to use the wireless to plug in all those things. So it's important that we can be there for those services. I've talked to Scott and Dana about maybe getting additional outdoor outlets so that people can plug in and there's only one outside outlet right now. Plus, we also have the farmers market in the summertime, and they all drink water too and use the facilities. So, but I think that's the best solution for now is to just provide drinking water for us, and we might have to replace some parts on the toilet and sink from time to time.
Manny, then John?
Perhaps we could ask the town manager for a request for proposal from a water company or water filtration company to give us a quote on what it would take to get standard water quality to look in a system. Instead of us making all these guesses, like Brandon said, contact somebody that's in the business of doing this and let them come back to us with what a real world cost is.
And what about in the meantime, every year, the libraries and cemeteries and other groups present budget proposals for the town. I presume that your current budget proposal that we'll discuss next month does not have anything in it for bringing in potable water deliveries, is that right? And is there some way either that you could generate a figure as to talking to a water provider, what would be needed so that we could talk about supplementing your budget for the new year while we continue to investigate options? I mean, if you have been in touch, maybe you've already been in touch with water suppliers. If not, we could certainly do that.
Yeah, I think there's Allen's Vending, and there's it used to be Crystal Rock. I think it's called something else.
Okay.
Yep.
Or Culligan,
I
I've
think
heard of
those
it. Culligan.
two can provide it. I don't know if they go. I think another problem is they don't go out. There's nothing in West Hartford, so they would have to come out special or
Right.
on their way to Sharon, which then they would probably use the highway.
Right.
So.
I imagine the quantities would be at the level where it'd be lucrative for them to come. If we're, summertime usage and that kind of thing. So I would imagine it'll be at a cost that they would make the trip.
So I would say, Sandy, let's put this in your budget, and I think if the board wants to do a monitor or something else, I'd like to at least get 4 people on the board to say they agree with that. Manny?
Yeah, I would like to propose a motion that we authorize the town manager to send out an RFP for this thing.
I will say that I've talked briefly with Jeremy
Yeah.
Delisle about this, and he said he'd be happy to try to meter usage. We got into this point of potable versus non-potable. Separating out might be more difficult. He could at least, I think, give us a daily gallon for usage.
That's why I say, put out an RFP and let water quality experts deal with this and bring it back to the board as far as what it would cost us to do this, you know, that's why we put out RFPs.
I think we need 4 people on the board to agree to an RFP proposal. Hopefully you do anything.
I would second that.
Was it an
Is
actual?
someone
motion?
making a motion here? Because Sandy's telling us what she thinks she needs and she can get out of the budget. We're reacting to something we happen to see at a retreat. If we hadn't had it there, this wouldn't even be on our minds. So this is, you know, I don't know how great governance this is, especially from what Sandy's telling us and what we know about the water.
Just because a tree falls in the woods doesn't mean it's not heard, okay? It means it's not heard. You hear a tree falls in the woods, okay? If a tree falls in the woods, it still falls and makes a sound.
Okay, but no
All
one's
right.
come to us in the library leadership before really saying this is a huge issue.
We should
Sandy
be
mentioned
able to do
potable
better.
water in her budget. But you know, it's the type of governance where you're like, you see something and you're like, oh, we're gonna do that, but it really isn't coming from the source. Scott?
Yeah, I appreciate, the process and the discussion and wanting to authorize the manager to go through an RFP process, but I prefer if we're gonna study it outside of what we can do internally, that you just let the town manager and the department and Dana work with Sandy to develop whether or not it's going to be an RFP or an RFQ. Because more than likely it's going to be a qualifications to get somebody to come out and design something that's going to give us good potable water and water that's not going to stain porcelain and all. If you make a motion to do an RFP, it really ties our hands and doesn't allow us to experience and experiment with some different alternatives to try to solve the problem. And I'm sure we can, knowing that it is a challenge for us out there and knowing there's some interest to make sure we address it prudently, then I think it's important for us to go to work and try to work through some options as a staff and then come forward when it comes to the financial piece. The other part, and normally finance says, take it out of their appropriation, not your budget, Scott. This is a town building that we're responsible for. It's called the West Hartford Community Center Library. I think that, I hate to say that I'm going to absorb that cost for the water, but I think it's a responsibility of the community center and library as a building to purchase the water, not come out of the appropriation that Sandy uses to run her operation.
That's why I had suggested she increase her request to cover the extra,
Well,
the extra cost.
that's a
But
big
it's the
building.
same outcome.
Right, same outcome. We have money in the budget for the operation of the building. And we pay for cleaning, we pay for other electricity. We should be paying for the water. So that's all I have to say, and you guys can make your
So we
decision.
have consensus to have Scott, Dana and John continue to work on this and bring us solutions to this problem.
I think we have a motion and a second on the table. I don't know, right?
I made a motion and Brandon seconded it.
Well, so we're in discussion. So I will just say that I think, I'm supportive of this continuing to be explored, and I would love the manager and the town staff to do what they see as prudent in terms of like putting this back on a priority list and then bringing options to us.
Brandon?
I will say that that I am sensitive to this idea of the difference between an RFP and an RFQ. And if you folks have pledged to work with folks to design a system, then I'm satisfied with that. You know, it sounds like this is as fast as things can actually happen. So I don't need to demand an RFP right now, is what I'm saying. I have confidence in the town staff.
I'll withdraw my motion for an RFP. I will, however, hold this to task.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks, Andy, for coming in. All right,
Thank you,
John, we have
Sandy.
a budget overview for you. It's our last item on the agenda.
Yes, you've got the memo, so I won't read it line by line, but I will just highlight a few things. Obviously, the budget process has begun. Hopefully, everybody's got their budget notebooks. The process began with department heads developing their proposals. We've also incorporated into these proposals or into the draft budget requests from the libraries, cemeteries, Bugby Senior Center. We've even plugged in really as placeholders to give a more realistic assessment of what a full budget would look like, last year's social service appropriation requests. So after having done that, and after having met with all the department heads, I met with Gail, and we both looked at areas that could easily be modified, or that we felt we could easily make recommendations to the board to modify them. So that is in column 5 under the town manager's line in the budget books. Now, suffice to say, what we've got as a result is a modified wish list. The first department budgets, I won't belabor the phrase wish list, but I think represents their first best statement of what they would like to operate their budget, their departments, right? And it's up to the finance director and me to make some recommendations as to how to reduce expenses and maybe how to enhance revenues in certain areas. And that has been done. The finance director might have gone a little further than I would have, than I did. So you might hear from her later in the process. But suffice to say, that's why we have a 2-month process in front of us. It's the exercise of evaluating all these budget proposals, shaking them out, kicking the tires, and trying to develop an idea as to how they can be further modified to come into alignment with projected revenues based on last year's tax rates. Obviously, there'll be a gap, and we'll have to decide as a group, the select board will have to decide how much of an impact to the taxpayers the voters can accept. So that's the art of the budgeting process. So we've got these initial budgets. I've modified them into what I view now as a modified wish list. But in these next 2 months, you'll be asked to make tough decisions about where we can cut further to bring expenses in line with what we expect reasonable revenues will be. So you've seen also the budget schedule, budget calendar. On the we're hoping that by the November 26th, an invitation has gone out to all of you to stop by if and when you can upstairs on the 3rd floor, say hello. The auditor may have a few questions for you as board members, and or you could learn from the auditor about what her work involves and what she is seeing so far. We're hoping that by the December 19th budget meeting, we will have reached a consensus as to what a final budget might look like, something that you would feel comfortable presenting to the board, to the public for approval, knowing that by mid-January, there might be some tweaks necessary based on petitions that come in from other social groups, social service groups that we haven't accounted for in the budget. And or that other items might have been identified. For example, decisions on your part to use lot funds, for example, instead of budgeted funds for some of these departments. So the next budget meetings will begin November 12th with the assessor and the town clerk. And 2 days later, at a special budget meeting, we'll hear from police, dispatch, and fire about their budgets.
Getting into it.
All of these department heads have been given your budget guidance document and taken it to heart. What we've seen so far in the budget in terms of significant drivers is that there's a union mandated wage increase of 4%, which the town has traditionally matched for non-union staff. There's also an 11% increase in the cost of health insurance, and the town has traditionally paid 85% of the premium cost of the health insurance. The assessor is currently predicting a slight increase in the grand list of 0.3%. Of course, that won't be finalized until the spring, and it won't be until the summer of 2025 that you will be then asked to set tax rates that would be necessary to raise the amount of revenue that you've presented to the voters and that the voters have approved at town meeting. I have mentioned that another tool in terms of revenue on the town's tool belt involves local option tax. We do collect now 1% of meals, room, and alcohol sales taxes in town, and that generates typically about $300,000 a year. The town staff will be thinking of and hoping to propose items that benefit a larger portion of the town's population in order to garner broad support for a possible lot vote on some items that otherwise might be in the general fund budget. That might be one way to take some relief off of the taxpayers. There's also been discussion of the town proposing to the voters the inclusion of another lot item, which would be a sales tax. I have gotten information from both VLCT and town council suggesting that if the select board wants to present this at town meeting, the board must first adopt a resolution recommending that the voters consider it at town meeting. And then the next step would be voter approval. I'll remind everybody, especially the new ones here, that there was a proposal like this last year and it failed by a relatively narrow vote. So it does seem that if you folks really wanted to push this notion and sell it to the population as a good alternative to the property tax to some limited degree, it does have the prospect of possibly getting approved. So that's my overview of the budget process and kind of where it stands now.
Okay, overview from John. Any questions, with the caveat that you will have plenty of time to ask in-depth questions?
Yes.
When the department heads present. Kim?
Two questions. One is that the I know it's a rough estimate, the grand list increase, that still won't be impacted at all by the reevaluation.
No, revaluation is always designed to be revenue neutral. It's just developing equity within the town's valuations between one property and another. It's never designed by itself as a way to raise revenues.
Right, but the increase in the grand list itself.
Well, yes, then it will be
0.3%.
reflected in, then it will be reflected in lower rates if you wanted, again, to have a neutral outcome. As if the property is worth 10% more, then obviously you'd want to reflect the rates to be 10% less so that you're achieving a neutral outcome year over year. But of course, when we see budgets adopt each year, generally you try to keep up with inflation and some of the fixed costs like wages and health insurance. And that's why the general burden has increased over time, generally in the neighborhood of 2, 3, 4%.
So I think I think I'm not being clear with my question,
Okay.
because what I'm asking is, does the prediction of a 0.3% increase in the grand list incorporate the reevaluation amounts? I'm not talking about the tax rate, I'm talking about the actual grand list dollar amount.
I guess my best way of saying it is that he is not looking at revalued numbers. He's looking at current dollars. And that he sees as 0.3% growth.
Okay.
So that
Yeah,
by
I think
itself,
the answer's
that
no.
by itself will generate a bit more revenue than we had last year, based on his previous estimate of grand list growth.
And I guess we'll look at that as well. And then the other thing is it possible that there could be a request that if department heads have presentations that are ready prior to the packet going out, that they could be shared with the board? Specifically that tight turnaround between, our questions are due November 7th for the 12th and the 14th, and those are some big departments, including fire, police, and dispatch. And so if our questions are due on Thursday at noon, but we're not getting the packet or presentations until that Thursday, we have the budget booked, and I've already started my questions. And there might be some that relate to narrative questions for department heads, not necessarily the finance department or the auditors, but if we're seeing the actual non-audit confirmed numbers for fiscal 24. But if there was something that was projected, we budgeted $10,000 for it and it was, 100% more, 100% less, we can ask that narrative of the department heads of why was this so much less than we budgeted or more?
Oh, well, I don't know about performance against budget. I don't know if Gail will have the ability to tell you, 40% into the current year, how we are.
No, for 24, not fiscal 25.
Okay.
And I'll ask the questions, and if they can get, and I'm not suggesting the finance department answer, but I'm saying if the fire department budgeted $300,000 for ambulance fees or whatever, and it actually came in at 100,000, because it impacts what we're budgeting for future years.
Substantial deviations from budget for 2024.
For fiscal 24.
If they can understand that, having not heard from the auditors yet.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway.
Hey, John, have you identified any more revenue streams possible for the town?
The lot one is one that comes first to mind. We've pretty much spent through ARPA, or committed, I should say, through ARPA. We always have the opportunity to chase grants, and I'm always one to try to bring home bacon in that respect.
Okay.
I know all the departments look for grants as well.
I'm sorry, I'm asking this question, but at what point will we understand what the lot funds are going to be, projections?
Oh, good question. I can try to get that from Gail in the days ahead. I think she said that there's a couple of reporting cycles from the state, and we're waiting on one that should be coming within the next couple of weeks, I think.
Okay, and then I had requested, and I think Kim in agreement, correct me if I'm wrong, to get an Excel copy of the budget. Just to have it exported to, I know there's a way to do that with the Munismark, to export it to Excel.
Okay.
I think Kim at the time was in agreement that she'd like a copy of it.
I mean, I could live without it, but I would like it if it's easy.
Excel copy of the budget.
Yeah, just export it to Excel. And I know that Gail had said that it's going to come up with a whole bunch of different lines and formatting, and I'll sort that out, but
Okay.
I'll be able to.
Any others interested in that particular product, if it's available? Okay.
If people want it, they can email it.
Yeah. Or I'll just send it to everybody and you can always disregard it. Okay. Good.
Okay, any other questions for John on the overview?
I really appreciate getting that overview. I
Oh,
think
sure.
It's really helpful, not only to board members, but for the public as well.
So yeah, John, when we go into this for lack of a better term, are we gonna have the slugfest on this thing on the night of the presentation? As far as if we have
Tell me what you mean.
concerns, well, if we have concerns about the budget,
We want to make cuts.
yeah, if we want to make cuts and
When
stuff.
should we do that?
Because I feel uncomfortable making cuts with department heads in the room.
Right,
It's hard
yeah,
when you have a department head here staring you down.
Yeah.
For us to cut out things that.
oh, no,
are
I
wrong.
get it, and that's why there are at least a couple of wrap-up sessions in your schedule. And we could take advantage of one or both of those. I know that in the last cycle, Gail made it clear that it's so much easier simply to ask all your tough questions while the department heads are here. But then we can also have a discussion about where you'd like to see cuts subsequently, if that's your preference.
I just know it's in the past,
I get it.
it's been difficult because regardless of what you say, especially when you're talking about budgets of salaries,
Right.
the elephant in the room is quite obvious.
Mhm.
Whether you say department head or whatever, we're a small town. I mean,
Yeah, and we know what the big departments are. We know
Yeah.
what they say about why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. The discussion often goes to police, fire, dispatch, and public works. To some lesser degree, parks and rec. Those are the ones with the great big budgets and a lot of items that you could look at more carefully, only because that's where the big numbers are.
that's why I just want to be,
Yeah.
I mean, and I know that we have department heads, managers, department heads that fully understand that it's not personal.
Yeah.
But still, when somebody's cutting into the budget, nobody likes it.
Okay. I can further discuss that with Gail.
Okay, thanks, John. We'll go to commission reports. Kim, do you have anything?
I do not.
Brandon?
No.
Mary?
Just briefly, H. Corey met on October 16th. We actually met with 3 people from QLLA. They pronounced it Quilla. It's Quechee Lakes Land Association. And these people discussed, this was Matt Donahue and Marcia Attilio in person and Myrna Brooks online. And they talked to us about what they're achieving regarding their DEI initiatives from a 23-member DEI council in Quechee. And it was very appreciated, helpful, even the fact that they talked to people individually and not just as a group, making everybody feel comfortable. So it was great.
I didn't.
Nope, I've been unable to attend.
Okay, I don't have anything, so to the consent agenda, I'll take a motion.
Russ, do we need to reassign Sue?
I think the question of what to do with Sue's assignments is
Come up.
partly based on whether we appoint a replacement
Right.
before the next election.
By the way, would you like the topic to be on the next agenda?
We should probably get
Yeah.
something on there at
Yeah.
least to see what our options are and,
Right.
you know, get a sense of what we want to do.
That's what I was
Oh,
gonna ask,
okay,
like, are we
yeah.
gonna have a discussion next time?
Okay, I'll take a motion for the consent agenda. Mary?
Sure. I move that the select board approve payroll ending 10/26/2024, approve the AP manifest of 10/25/24 and 10/31/2024, approve meeting minutes of 10/15/2024, future meetings, November 12th, 2024, November 14th, 2024, which is a budget meeting, November 19th, 2024 budget meeting, and November 26th, 2024.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second from Kim. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, and I'll take a motion to adjourn this select board meeting.
So moved at 9:15.
Do we have a second?
I'll second the
We
motion.
have a second from Mary. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we are adjourned.
All right. Don't forget to sign.
Oh, yes.
Precisely on